Chapter 964. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had met Yin Kong before, so they naturally recognized this great enemy of the Jingyi school. As soon as they saw Yin Kong appear, they immediately felt as if they were facing a great enemy. In the eyes of the sisters, Yin Kong was obviously a much greater threat than Yen Fang. Yen Fang naturally didn't recognize Yin Kong. She couldn't help but feel apprehensive when she saw Yin Kong appear and reveal strong hostility towards her. It was especially so when she saw the strong greed in his eyes. She regretted revealing the information about the Heaven Kuan Rui mirror too early. Although this mirror was a unique type of magic treasure, and only one person in the world could use it, everyone who didn't get their hands on this magic treasure would have the same thought. Why aren't I the one who can use this magic treasure? These days Yin Kong had been hiding near Mount Longhu. His cultivation was quite high. He was a Jinshin master and the leader of the Shintian sect. This was the golden time for cultivation. The others of the Jingyi school were focused on cultivation, so no one noticed that such a powerful enemy was lurking near Mount Longhu. In addition, the power of the Jingyi school in Mount Longhu was no longer the same as it had been in the heyday of the Song dynasty. At that time, there were tens of thousands of cultivators in the Jingyi school. If a fly flew into Mount Longhu, the Jingyi school would know whether it was male or female. Yin Kong had already received the order from Zhang Tianfeng, the sect master of Shintian sect. Although the disciples of Shintian sect had left Mount Longhu, he himself remained at the foot of Mount Longhu, patiently waiting for Zhang Tianfeng's prophecy to come true. When he went to Mount Longhu, Zhang Tianfeng had made a prophecy to him in private. First, the internal strife of the Jingyi sect was about to occur, and the disaster would start from the Wall of Desolation. Second, there would be a great change in the Chinese cultivation world. First, there would be the rebirth of the Black Fox, and then there would be the chaos of the world. Although the reincarnation of Wisdom King would quell the disaster, although the latter also started from the reincarnation of Wisdom King, the final fulfillment would happen next to the Wind Dust Stone at the foot of Mount Longhu. At first, Yin Kong didn't understand what his senior brother sect master meant, but now he understood. While they were sects that spent most of their time overseas, they still paid close attention to the situation in the domestic cultivation world. During the founding of the People's Republic and the 10 years of turmoil, a large number of cultivators left the cultivation world. Some of them followed Old Jiang to Taiwan, while others went south to Southeast Asia, west to England, France, east to the United States, Canada, and other places. In the beginning, these people were all alone. In addition, they were Taoist forces. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to enter the powerful Christian capital. Because of this, the overseas sects had fought countless battles with the Western sects in private. Many Chinese cultivators had bled in foreign countries before they could finally establish their own sections. After paying an extremely heavy price, the elites of these sects took root in foreign countries. Although the environment was harsh and cruel, foreign cultivators had a unique and relaxed environment. It was not like the domestic and foreign countries which seemed to be relaxed and free on the surface, but in reality, there were surveillance and restrictions everywhere. As the leader of the Shintian sect, an overseas sect of the Jingyi school, Yin Kong had a very strong sense of mission and responsibility deep in his heart. He had already believed that the true method of the Chinese cultivation world had fallen, and that the Jingyi school was in a precarious situation, weak and decayed. It needed to be uprooted. Only complete destruction would be a new beginning. This was the dogma that Yin Kong believed in. Yin Kong naturally knew about the Yin Kuan Rui mirror and its magical effects. Even a blind man could see the strong greed in his eyes. This kind of eyes was clearly the eyes of a fanatical believer. Li Yundong understood this kind of eyes in an instant. Only in the Padala Palace in Tibet had he seen the believers burning their fingers to offer Buddha with the same kind of eyes. But what shocked Li Yundong and Ziyuan the most was that although the eyes in his eyes were fanatical, there was always a trace of calmness and rationality in the depths of his eyes. A fanatical and self-controlled master was definitely the most difficult opponent to deal with. Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at each other, and Ziyuan secretly said, "This person is ambitious, no less than an ambitious person than Wang Jinyuan. Do you want to make a move?" Li Yundong sighed in his heart and wrote on the ground, "The Chinese cultivation world is in turmoil, and ambitious people are emerging frequently. This is not a good thing. Let's see." Ziyuan said, "The Shintian sect is an overseas force of the Jingyi school. I once heard Master vaguely mention that the overseas forces are now very strong. It seems that the strength of the sect has far surpassed the strength of the Jingyi school in the country. I think it's better for you to wait and see. After all, this is an internal struggle of the Jingyi school." Li Yundong nodded and stayed by the side watching quietly. Li Yunyang and Zi Yuan could control their temper, but Yan Fang really couldn't bear it. She only felt that Yin Kong's eyes were like a hunter staring at his prey, staring at her closely. Yan Fang felt a burst of fear in her heart. She subconsciously took a step back and said fiercely, "What do you want to do? Don't think that I'm afraid of you just because you're from the Shintian sect." Yin Kong restrained the fanatical gaze in his eyes. He pretended to be kind and said to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, "Don't be afraid. No matter what, we are all from the Jingyi school. With me here, she can't hurt you." As he said this, Yin Kong turned his head and looked at Yan Fang with a murderous look. "Did you hear what these two little sisters said just now? If you hand over the heaven and earth Rui mirror, I'll spare your life. What do you think?" Yan Fang's face changed. Although she couldn't use the heaven and earth Rui mirror herself, she couldn't hand it over even if she was killed. Yan Fang took another step back and sneered. "Do you think I'll take this powerful magical weapon with me?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao hadn't expected that Yin Kong would jump out to help them at this time. Although the two little girls were young and had little experience, they were not stupid. They knew that Yin Kong was using their names to take it by force. The most important thing was that their reputation was not so important, but they had the Jingyi school behind them. Although Deng Jiao wanted Yan Fang to hand over the heaven and earth Rui mirror, she also knew that she couldn't make a mistake at this critical juncture. The little girl took a step forward and said in a crisp voice, "Jinren Yin Kong, on behalf of the whole Jingyi school, I thank you for your kindness. But after all, this is an internal matter of our Jingyi school, and we don't need your help here." Yin Kong didn't expect Deng Jiao to be so polite at such a young age. He was slightly surprised and said, "Oh? Which generation are you from? Who is your master?" Before Deng Jiao could speak, Deng Yu snorted and said, "We know you. You want to replace our Jingyi school. Don't try to get close to us. We won't fall for it." Yin Kong didn't get angry. Instead he laughed out loud. His eyes were filled with a strange light as he stared at the pair of beautiful sisters. It wasn't because he was bewitched by their beauty, but because he saw that they were both smart and talented. He wanted to kidnap them just like he did with Li Sen and trick them into becoming disciples of Shen sect. Yin Kong said with a smile, "Little girl, the Jingyi school is not the only orthodox school in the world. Our sect leader Zhang Tianfang is also a direct descendant, the orthodox of the orthodox school." Deng Yu's words were quick and unforgiving. She said, "Yes, we were born of the same root. Why are you so eager to torture each other? Why are you being so aggressive again and again?" Yin Kong smiled, waved his hand and said, "Little girl, I won't talk to you about this. Anyway, you won't understand. So, have you ever thought about abandoning the darkness for the light and coming to our Shintian sect to cultivate?" Deng Yu said, "Bah, why don't you abandon the darkness for the light and return to the embrace of our Jingyi school? As the saying goes, when the leaves fall back to their roots, the fox dies on the hill. Shouldn't you overseas wanderers do the same?" Seeing that his persuasion was useless, Yin Kong's face darkened slightly. He snorted and said, "You're so young but you have a sharp tongue." He no longer looked at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao but turned to Yan Fang. He sneered and said, "Why don't you hand over the mirror of heaven and earth?" Yan Fang's eyes were full of fear and vigilance. She sneered and said, "Do you think I'll take the mirror of heaven and earth with me? You want this powerful magical weapon? Stop dreaming." As she spoke, Yan Fang moved and immediately turned into a beam of cyan light and fled into the distance. Yin Kong's eyes flashed. With a flick of his finger, a small flying bug, which was hard to see with the naked eye, flew to Yan Fang and disappeared in an instant. When Deng Yu and Deng Jiao saw Yan Fang escape, they immediately became anxious and wanted to chase after her. However, as soon as they moved, Yin Kong stopped in front of them and said with a smile, "Two little girls, don't chase after her. Even if I catch up with you, you won't be able to defeat me. Why don't you come back to the Shintian sect with me?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were shocked and angry. They said in unison, "What do you want to do?" Although Yin Kong had a strong desire for the mirror of heaven and earth, he also knew that it was very likely that Yan Fang would not take this powerful magical weapon with her. If he fought with her at this time, although there was an 80% chance that he could catch her, he might not be able to force out the whereabouts of the powerful magical weapon. It was very likely that he would alarm the masters of the Jingyi school. He quickly calculated the gains and losses. After placing a tracking marker on Yan Fang, he shifted his target to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, intending to intercept them and bring them back to Shintian sect. Yin Kong laughed, turned his wrist and grabbed Deng Yu and Deng Jiao. He said, "Stop struggling and come with me." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao only felt a powerful force enveloping them, and they could hardly move. They were so shocked that their beautiful faces turned pale. Li Yundong was hiding in the bushes. Seeing that Yin Kong was about to attack Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, he snorted and wanted to use the Mahamudra Kung Fu to save them, but he was afraid that his true identity would be exposed, so he flicked his finger toward Yin Kong's face. Just as Yin Kong's fingers were about to grab the pair of beautiful sisters, he suddenly felt goosebumps all over his body. He felt a gust of wind blowing directly at his face. He subconsciously lowered his head, and a finger aura swept past his back at lightning speed. It was so painful that it felt like a piece of flesh had been gouged out. Yin Kong knew that this was just a finger chi, but its power was so terrifying. He was so scared that his heart was pounding. He looked in the direction of the finger chi with fear in his eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "Is it Celestial Master Zhang? What's the use of sneak attacks? If you have the ability, let's fight face to face." However, when he shouted, there was no movement around him. Yin Kong was shocked and angry. He knew that this person had been lurking around him, but he hadn't noticed it at all. In particular, this sudden finger flick was as powerful as a gun. This kind of cultivation of spiritual power was really shocking, far stronger than his. The more Yin Kong watched, the more scared he became. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He gritted his teeth, looked at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao with hatred and unwillingness, then turned around and quickly chased after Yen Fong. Chapter 965. Seeing Yen Fong escape, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao wanted to chase after her, but they were stopped by Yin Kong. Seeing that Yin Kong was also running away, they didn't dare to chase after him anymore. If the two of them were still in the Sanju formation at this time, or if they still had the art of summoning immortals in their bodies, they would naturally not be afraid of Yin Kong. However, at this time, their cultivation was ranked at the bottom in the Jingyi school, so how could they catch up with the Jinshin master? They would be lucky not to be taken away by him. Seeing that Yin Kong had disappeared in the blink of an eye, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. The pair of sisters looked at the bushes in confusion. Deng Yu said in a clear voice, "Which Qianbei saved us just now? We are very grateful." Deng Jiao also added, "Qianbei, if it's convenient, please come out and meet us. We want to thank you in person." At this time, Ziyuan said to Li Yundong via voice transmission, "Aren't you going to go out and meet them?" Li Yundong shook his head and wrote on the ground, asking, "You, their savior, don't even want to go out and meet them. Why should I go out? This is the internal affairs of the Jingyi school. It's not convenient for me to intervene. It's better to avoid trouble." The two little girls were talking loudly, but no one appeared. They were very disappointed. Deng Yu was more lively and easily emotional. She said to Deng Jiao dejectedly, "Sister, what should we do now? Master asked us to defeat Li Yundong, but we let him and Ziyuan go. Leader asked us to atone for our crimes and bring back the Chengkuan Rui mirror. Now we let Yen Fong go and returned empty-handed. We're screwed this time, we're dead for sure." Deng Jiao was also worried. She sighed softly and said, "It's a blessing, not a curse. If it's a curse, we can't avoid it. Let's go back first and tell the leader Shirshu about the situation here. Maybe he will understand." Deng Yu had no other choice but to nod in agreement. The two of them turned around and went down the mountain along the original path. Li Yundong heard it clearly in the bushes. His heart sank and he thought to himself, "Sure enough, the matter between me and Ziyuan has implicated Deng Yu and Deng Jiao. I can't just leave like this. I have to find a way to help them get through this crisis." Seeing him frown, Ziyuan knew what he was worried about, so she said, "Are you worried that Deng Yu and Deng Jiao will be punished by Celestial Master Zhang?" Li Yundong nodded, sighed and said, "I really shouldn't have dragged both of them into the water. If I hadn't done so, I wouldn't have been able to break through the Sanju formation. The power of the formation is too strong. Even a golden immortal can't resist it." Ziyuan said softly, "Then how do you want to help them?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Why don't I take them both with me? I don't think the Jingyi school will turn against me because of them, will they?" Without thinking about it, Ziyuan immediately shook her head and said, "How do you know that they are willing to leave the Jingyi school? Didn't you see that the two of them already have a deep sense of identity and belonging to the Jingyi school before? Even if they are willing to leave, have you ever thought about how much trouble you will cause for yourself and the Jingyi school by doing this?" Li Yundong thought for a moment, sighed and said, "Before I cultivated, I thought that the immortals in heaven were all powerful, and they could do whatever they wanted. Now that I have reached the peak of cultivation, I know that it is not the case at all." Ziyuan pursed her lips into a smile and said, "The way of heaven is reincarnation, and everything has its cause and effect. This world is like a huge net and everyone is caught in it. No matter how powerful a person is, it is impossible for him to act unscrupulously from ancient times to modern times, in China and abroad. King Xerxes of Persia, known as the King of Kings and the God of Gods, thought that he stood at the peak of the world and looked down on all living beings. Therefore, regardless of the opposition of his ministers, he went on an expedition to Greece. Although he conquered nearly 100 countries along the way and finally looted Athens, he was then defeated in the Battle of Salami and was killed. Emperor Qin unified China and thought that he had collected all the metals in the world and destroyed all the resistance forces. No one could resist him anymore, so he acted violently and cruelly. As a result, the powerful Qin dynasty came to an end. In the early days of Emperor Yang of the Sui dynasty, he was wise and skillful in both literature and martial arts. But later he was headstrong and self-opinionated. He went on expeditions to Korea 3 times and suppressed the aristocratic families at home, causing the officials to be alienated. In the end, the powerful Sui dynasty also came to an end. Ziyuan said in a soft voice, "The emperor, who represents the supreme power and status in the human world, is like this. The same is true in the heaven realm. Even the Jade Emperor, who is known as the God of Gods, can't do whatever he wants. Think about it. Traveling monk's son, who made a mess in the heaven palace, was also suppressed under the 5 Elements mountain for 500 years. Li Yundong laughed and said, "You're right. I'll listen to you. But how do you think I should help Deng Yu and Deng Jiao?" Ziyuan thought for a moment and said seriously, "Find Zhang Tianshi directly and reason with him face to face." Li Yundong clapped his hands and praised, "Well, get straight to the point. I'll go now. Are you coming with me?" Ziyuan shook her head but didn't say anything. She just stared at Li Yundong with a helpless look in her eyes. Li Yundong knew that although Ziyuan had been repeatedly suppressed by the Jingyi school, she had a deep sense of identity with the Linggong sect. The Linggong sect was a branch of the Jingyi school, just like the Chuanjin Dragon sect was a branch of the Chuanjin sect. It was impossible for Du Fei and the others to betray the Chuanjin sect and become enemies with it. Li Yundong didn't force her. He said to Ziyuan, "Then will you wait for me here?" After what had happened to Yan Fang, Yin Kong, Deng Yu, and Deng Jiao, Ziyuan's previous tangled thoughts had been diluted a lot. She nodded subconsciously. Li Yundong laughed and said to Ziyuan, "Then wait for me. I'll be back in a minute." Ziyuan watched Li Yundong leave quickly. For a moment she was lost in thought. After a long time, she sighed softly and sat down gently beside the Fengqian stone. After Li Yundong went down the mountain, he quickly headed for the main peak of Mount Longhu. He didn't stop all the way and went straight to the cave where Zhang Tianshi was cultivating in seclusion. As soon as he arrived at the door of the cave, he saw Deng Yu and Deng Jiao kneeling at the door of the stone cave, looking depressed. Deng Yu didn't know that Li Yundong had returned. She whispered to her sister, "It's over. Sister, it's terrible this time. Sherbo doesn't care about us at all. When are we going to kneel here?" Deng Jiao scolded in a low voice, "Well, stop talking. Of course, Sherbo won't be happy with your attitude." Deng Yu pouted and muttered in a low voice, "He won't lock us up for 10 years like Sherbo Wang Yuanshan did, will he? Who can stand that?" Deng Jiao turned her head and glared at her. She was about to speak when she suddenly heard Zhang Tianshi's voice coming through the thick stone wall of the cave. "There are distinguished guests visiting. Deng Yu, Deng Jiao, why don't you welcome them on my behalf?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were stunned. They subconsciously turned their heads and saw that Li Yundong was standing not far behind them. They were both delighted at the same time and subconsciously got up to call Li Yundong's name. But as soon as they opened their mouths, they found that something was wrong. Deng Jiao blurted out, "Li Yundong, why are you back again?" Deng Yu clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Well, Li Yundong, you are really a good person. Did you come back to save us?" Li Yundong nodded to them with a smile, then formed a palm with one hand and bowed in the direction of Zhang Tianshi's voice, saying, "Jinren Zhang, we meet again." Zhang Tianshi's voice was not as angry and annoyed as Li Yundong had imagined. Instead, he smiled calmly and said, "It's an honor for Mount Longhu to come here, Li Yundong. Please sit down." Li Yundong didn't stand on ceremony. He sat down on a rock that was half the height of a man and said, "Jinren Zhang, I came here for—" Zhang Tianshi interrupted him before he could finish, "Jinren Li, I know why you are here and what your purpose is. Do you want me to let Deng Yu and Deng Jiao go? Okay, but I have a request." Li Yundong remained calm and said, "What request?" Celestial Master Zhang smiled and said, "How about having a match with me?" Li Yundong was shocked. Although his cultivation quotient had reached the peak, and he had shocked all the heroes in the battle again and again. He was already the best in the world. Zhang Tianxu's reputation was too resounding. For thousands of years, although the leaders of the Jingyi school of Mount Longhu had rarely fought with others, as long as they took the initiative to fight, they were almost invincible. Their winning rate was terrifyingly high. Only when Zhang Tianxu had passed by the soaring cloud Taoist temple in Zhejiang province and fought with the Taoist priest, did he lose. Even today, the soaring cloud Taoist temple, one of the 3 famous Taoist temples in Jiangnan, still had sword marks left by Zhang Tianxu's sword after he had lost the battle. It was also because of this example that the previous leaders of the Jingyi school had been greatly touched and taught a lesson. From then on, the leader of the Jingyi school had almost never fought with others easily. He had cultivated the cowardice formula to perfection and had reached the peak. Even if the followers of the Shintian sect had forced their way to the gate of the Jingyi school, even if the mystical silver fox had almost destroyed the cultivation world, Zhang Tianxu was still calm and did not make a move. Li Yundong knew that he would never be able to have such patience. However, he was familiar with the classics of Buddhism and Taoism and knew what kind of karma Jingyi school and many Taoist sects had suffered in the past 100 years. Therefore, he could more or less understand the mentality of the leader of the Jingyi school and the overall situation. Li Yundong thought to himself, Zhang Tianxu actually took the initiative to invite me to fight. Has he also broken through the 9th thunder tribulation and approached the golden immortal realm? Otherwise, how could he dare to make a move so easily? Li Yundong's invincible reputation had been achieved by himself in the past year, but the prestige of Zhang Tianxu of the Jingyi school had been accumulated for more than 1,900 years. Although Li Yundong was skilled and bold in the face of Zhang Tianxu's prestige, he couldn't help but feel a heavy pressure for a moment, and his heart was a little heavy. Li Yundong took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes and said firmly, "Well, if you want to fight, I'll fight. I just don't know how you want to fight, Taoist Zhang?" Celestial Master Zhang chuckled and said, "The great battle of the heavenly law of the cultivation world has just ended. If we continue to fight, I'm afraid it's not a good thing. Why don't we play a game of chess with the sky as our chessboard?" Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and asked, "Oh? How do you play a game of chess with the sky as your chessboard?" Chapter 965. Celestial Master Zhang's challenge text updates fastest. Add. Chapter 966. The Battle of Tianyuan. Li Yundong knew himself very well. He had gone to college, but in fact he hadn't learned anything except cultivation knowledge and kung fu. It could be said that he had basically wasted several years in college. His time and energy had been devoted to games and Japanese action stars. Although he had stayed in the spirit space of the Burning Thumb Pot for many years and had read some chess records, when it came to playing Go, he really didn't dare to say that he was a master. When he heard that Zhang Tianxu wanted to play Go with him, he was a little uncertain and complained in his heart. However, he didn't show it on his face, and there was no sign of him admitting defeat. He asked Zhang Tianxu how to play with the sky as the chessboard, but in fact he was quickly calculating the odds of winning in his heart. Li Yundong knew that such a battle could be regarded as a civil battle, not a physical battle. Although the civil battle was not as earth-shattering as the physical battle, nor was it as dangerous and unpredictable as the physical battle. In fact, the civil battle was more likely to be an upset, because the rules of the civil battle were the most difficult to grasp. Moreover, whoever set the question of the civil battle would basically win more than half of the battle. This was just like the PK between Sanda and Muay Thai in China. Although neither side was convinced by the other, the first thing to compete in the PK was not the martial arts, but the rules of the game. Whoever could compete for the rules of the game would basically be the winner. Because no matter how powerful a Muay Thai master was, if he played according to the rules of Sanda, the result would be one word: loss. No matter how powerful a Sanda master was, if he played according to the rules of Muay Thai, the result would be the same: loss. This iron law had been verified many times in the fighting competition between China and Thailand. Whether it was fighting or fighting, Li Yundong was a master at the level of a great grandmaster. Naturally, he knew that when the strength of the two sides was close, whoever proposed the method and rules of the fight first would win more than half of the battle. Although he was a golden immortal master, the reason why the civil battle was an upset was that there were many rules and regulations in the civil battle, which could minimize the strength gap between the two sides. Li Yundong secretly admired Zhang Tianxu's good plan, but he had to accept it. Zhang Tianxu had expected that although Li Yundong knew that his chances of winning were extremely low, he would definitely not give in. He said to Li Yundong in a clear voice, "Jinrenli, look up." Li Yundong looked up and saw that the sky above Mount Longhu was covered with clouds. Lines slowly appeared in the clouds, dividing the clouds into pieces and turning them into a huge chessboard. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately understood. He knew that Celestial Master Zhang wanted to play a game of chess in the sky with the sky as the chessboard and the clouds as the chess pieces. Such a battle of words not only required an extremely strong cultivation of Dharma power, but also required a profound foundation in Go. For a cultivator, it was impossible to be able to play chess on the ground while the chess pieces were in the clouds unless they were a great grandmaster who was one with heaven and man and was well versed in both the pen and the sword. Li Yundong took a deep breath. After a little hesitation, he simply agreed and said, "Okay, but who will go first?" Celestial Master Zhang laughed and said, "Jinren, I'm old and I'm an old man. My cultivation is not as good as yours. Why don't you let me go first?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. This Celestial Master Zhang is really cunning. He actually lowered himself and admitted in front of his disciple that his cultivation was not as good as mine. How can I refute this? If a person's status was too high and his reputation was too great, sometimes it was not a good thing. Li Yundong had originally thought that since Celestial Master Zhang had proposed the rules and regulations of the battle, he would definitely let him have the first move. However, he hadn't expected that Celestial Master Zhang would be so shameless as to take the first move. He was really shameless to a certain extent. Ordinary people were far from being able to match him, at least he himself was ashamed of his inferiority. Li Yundong's eyes widened and he cried out involuntarily, "Jinren Zhang, you won't even let me have the first move?" Celestial Master Zhang didn't seem to hear the hint of sarcasm hidden in Li Yundong's words. He said with a smile, "The guest follows the host. Jinren Li is a guest, so of course you have to follow me, the host of the East Road. What do you think?" "Well, you can even say such words in such a dignified manner." Li Yundong cursed in his heart. "I was careless, really careless. As the leader of the Jingyi school, Celestial Master Zhang is such a rascal. How can I win?" Li Yundong thought for a while and soon came up with an idea in his heart. He sighed and said, "Since Jinren Zhang has said so, please go first." Celestial Master Zhang's spirit was lifted and he said, "Okay, then I won't stand on ceremony." As he said this, Li Yundong looked up and saw a white light rushing into the sky from the cave abode. With a swoosh, it pierced through the clouds and pierced a hole in the center of the chessboard, just like a black chess piece in the middle of the chessboard. When Li Yundong saw where the black chess piece was, he immediately gasped in shock and said in his heart, "No way. The first move of Tianyuan? Is Celestial Master Zhang crazy?" There was a saying in Go called golden horn and silver edge grass belly, which meant that on the chessboard the four corners were the most valuable, followed by the place near the border, the middle, and the last one was the Tianyuan position in the middle. Since ancient times, Go had been like the art of war. Although the Central Plains was a rich and prosperous place, it was also a place that military masters had to fight for. Moreover, it was empty all around with no one to rely on. There were flaws everywhere and there was no danger to defend. Unlike the corners where at least two sides could not be attacked, and the silver edge had one side to rely on. Only the middle could be attacked from all directions. It could be said that it could not be defended or attacked at all. If someone played Tianyuan first in Go, there were only two possibilities. The first possibility was that he was a peerless genius, and the second possibility was that he didn't know how to play Go at all. Although Li Yundong was not a national player of Go, he also knew that Wu Qingyuan, the strongest national player of Go in the history of Go, had never played Go like this. Wu Qingyuan was born in Fuzhou, Fujian province. At the age of 11 he went to Duan Chirui's mansion to support his family with Go skills. At the age of 13 his Go skills reached the peak and he was invincible in China. Because the peak of Go in the world was in Japan at that time, Wu Qingyuan went east to Japan at the age of 14 and began his career as a professional Go player. At the age of 19, Wu Qingyuan challenged the #1 national player of Japan, Haninjo Hidia. For the next 20 years Wu Qingyuan dominated the Japanese Go world, sweeping thousands of troops and never meeting an opponent. In particular, during the period when Japan's military government invaded China, Wu Qingyuan single-handedly launched an unprecedented 10 battles, defeating 7 of Japan's top Go players one after another and defeating all of them until they were demoted. Even the defeated Japanese had no choice but to respectfully call Wu Qingyuan Showa Chess Saint when they saw him. Such an unprecedented Go master had never played Tianyuan in the first game, but Zhang Tianshi, the leader of the Jingyi school of Mount Longhu, had played Tianyuan in the first game. This was either a provocation, a deliberate humiliation because his Go skills were far better than Li Yundong's, or Zhang Tianshi didn't know how to play Go at all. But the problem was that Zhang Tianshi, who had always been patient and cultivated the cowardly formula, had taken the initiative to challenge Li Yundong. How could he not know Go? Was he kidding? As soon as Zhang Tianshi played Tianyuan in the first game, Li Yundong felt an unparalleled arrogance. It seemed to be the arrogance and disdain of the Jingyi school of Mount Longhu that had been passed down for thousands of years. If he didn't have absolute confidence, he wouldn't have taken this step. Although Li Yundong didn't think that his Go skills were good, he was not a rookie who could be trampled on. Seeing that Zhang Tianshi was so arrogant, he couldn't help but be shocked and angry. After taking a deep breath, although he was angry in his heart, he suppressed it and calmed down to think of countermeasures. Zhang Tianshi's first move was Tianyuan, which was equivalent to waving his sword and going straight to the Zhonggong in the first move. He drew his sword and provoked Li Yundong with extraordinary momentum and amazing boldness. At this time, Li Yundong had to face two choices. The first was to bear it and honestly occupy the corner, lay out the 3x3 position or the start position. The corner would be thick and the power would be strong. At that time, when he fought with Zhang Tianshi's chess pieces in the middle game, his chances of winning would be greatly increased. But this also had a weakness. Li Yundong would be inferior in momentum. Most of the time, whether it was Go fighting or fighting, it was all about momentum. Once his momentum was lost, he would basically lose more than half of it. The three armies could seize the commander, but an ordinary man could not. Therefore, Li Yundong had another way to deal with it, which was to face Zhang Tianshi's aggressive challenge and fight head-on with his sword. Li Yundong was also a proud person. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and waved his finger in the sky. He drew a circle in the air with his fingertip and drew a white chess piece in the cloud chessboard. The white chess piece was placed in the lower right corner. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao didn't know how to play Go, so they just looked up at the sky blankly. However, some of the other disciples of the Jingyi school in Mount Longhu also noticed this scene. They all looked up in surprise, pointed at the sky, and whispered to each other. Ziyuan, who was waiting at the side peak, also noticed that something was wrong. She looked up and was shocked. At this time, Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi did not give in to each other. Faced with Li Yundong's aggressive move, Zhang Tianshi did not hesitate to break it. The two chess pieces were entangled together at the beginning of the game, forming a murderous momentum. Although the chess game in the sky was not as fierce and thrilling as the battle between the two of them, it was still thrilling. Ziyuan saw that Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi were fighting each other, refusing to give in to each other. The black pieces and the white pieces were close to each other, and soon they formed the most thrilling and unpredictable mega-avalanche posture in Go. Ziyuan was shocked and thought to herself, I once heard from my master that Zhang Tianshi is proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. His Go skills are even more extraordinary. Although Li Yundong is good at fighting, Go is not his strong point. He is fighting with Zhang Tianshi in close combat and playing the mega-avalanche posture. He is really courting death. No, I have to go and help him. Otherwise he will definitely lose. Thinking of this, Ziyuan's figure flashed and quickly rushed toward the main peak of Mount Longhu. Chapter 966. The Battle of Tianyuan. The fastest word update, at. Chapter 967. Ziyuan ran all the way looking up at the sky. She saw that Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi were not giving in to each other. They were fighting back and forth, as if there were tens of thousands of horses galloping on the chessboard and thousands of troops fighting each other. In the sky, except for the clouds on the chessboard, which were as calm as stone carvings, the surrounding clouds were constantly rippling, full of murderous intent. Ziyuan was extremely fast. She carefully hid her figure and aura all the way. When she was not far from Li Yundong, she couldn't wait to send a voice transmission to him. Li Yundong, jump out quickly. Don't play the mega avalanche with him. This mega avalanche is full of traps and traps. You can't play it? Li Yundong was shocked when he heard this, but his expression did not change. The most taboo in a game of Go was for someone to speak up. First, it would destroy the player's train of thought. Second, it would destroy the balance of the game. Third, it would involve moral issues. As the saying goes, when watching a game, one should not talk about a true gentleman. Li Yundong thought silently for a while. He raised his hand and waved his fingers. His white piece was still moving toward the black piece. It was still a head-on confrontation. Ziyuan was stunned, but she soon understood that Li Yundong was using his own actions to tell her that he wanted to rely on his own strength to play this game, and he didn't want Ziyuan to participate in it. Ziyuan stood there for a long time, watching Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi move their pieces quickly. The chessboard quickly became thick. The reason why the mega avalanche was terrible was that once the momentum of the avalanche was formed, it was not only a game of chess with killing intent and tricks everywhere, but also a game of chess that would not end until one side died. It was like a snowy landslide on the top of a mountain. At first, the snowball was very small and its power was relatively small, so it could be stopped and cut off. But when the snowball rolled down, it would become bigger and bigger, and its power would become stronger and stronger. In the end, it would become a terrifying force that could swallow everything. Therefore, this kind of contest in Go was called the Mega Avalanche. If Li Yundong had jumped out at the beginning, he might have been able to avoid this kind of endless chess game. However, he chose to face the difficulties head-on, chose to meet them on a narrow road, and drew his sword to fight. This meant that this game of chess was fierce and it was impossible for it to be good. Ziyuan watched Li Yundong move very quickly, almost without thinking, as if he was playing fast chess in 10 seconds. Although there was nothing wrong with his response, she was still secretly anxious and her heart was burning. She thought, Li Yundong's strength is his profound spiritual power and invincible fighting. Go and fighting are really two different fields. As the saying goes, different professions are different worlds. How can he beat Zhang Tianshi, who has played Go for many years in Go? If Li Yundong had wanted to drag the other party into the later stage of the official battle from the beginning, he might have been able to turn defeat into victory with his deep and powerful cultivation quotient. But now he was fighting to the death in the early stage that was really courting death. Ziyuan knew that Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi were using the sky as the chessboard and the clouds as the chess pieces. Every move consumed a lot of spiritual power and jinqi. In addition, the brain had to think intensely. It could be said that it was a double test of a person's essence, qi and spirit. The longer it dragged on, the more powerful Li Yundong would be, but the shorter it was, the fiercer Zhang Tianshi would be. Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi had made more than a dozen moves in a row. The momentum of the mega avalanche had been completely formed and could not be reversed. At a glance, one could see that the white and black pieces were closely leaning against each other, like a heavy snow landslide on the top of a mountain, extending all the way to the middle. Li Yunyang was also suffering in silence. He had been pushed by Zhang Tianshi to fight with the other party in such an extremely unfavorable situation. When he saw the other party's arrogant first move, he chose to fight hand-to-hand with the other party in a rage. But even if he made a move in anger, Li Yundong's choice was still calm, because he was a master who was not strong in Go. He knew that he was best at close combat in Go. Close combat was also the most dangerous and difficult part of the game. Many Go beginners, intermediate Go players, and most female Go players like to fight in the early game and kill in the middle game. Only the real masters like to look at the overall situation and compete with their opponents in terms of calculation ability and control of the situation. This logic was similar to StarCraft or Warcraft in esports games. Most beginners and middle-tier players like to use their ultimate skills. They would use all sorts of ultimate skills to scare their opponents and make them break out in a cold sweat. However, true top-tier experts rarely used their ultimate skills. Most of the time, they would compete with their opponents in the later stages of the game, competing with their operations and defeating their opponents fair and square. This was because they were extremely confident in their own strength. They believed that they could control everything and defend against all ultimate skills. However, Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi were fighting. The strange thing was that Li Yundong, a rookie who couldn't be ranked in the middle level of Go, didn't take the initiative to make a big move first, but Zhang Tianshi made a big move first. Although Li Yundong was annoyed, how could he not respond? Could it be that he really wanted to compete with Zhang Tianshi for the back position? That would be really courting death. Although this move consumed a lot of spiritual energy and jinqi, in Li Yundong's opinion, it was impossible for the dignified leader of the Jingyi school to be unable to finish a game of Go, right? Therefore, Li Yundong had chosen the most chaotic and thrilling way of playing. He had chosen to win in the chaos and danger. In the chaos, perhaps Zhang Tianshi would make a mistake in his calculation, or he would fall into his own trap. These were all possible. Li Yundong looked nervous and his fingers kept waving in the air. From time to time, in the cave where Zhang Tianshi was located, there were beams of white light shooting up into the sky, piercing through the clouds in the sky. On the side peak, Zhang Kongyun was stroking his beard and looking up at the sky. Zhang Lufang blinked her eyes and kept saying, "Oh master, who is going to win? Tell me, I'm so anxious." Hey, what is the meaning of this move? Why did Li Yundong play in this place? What does sect leader Martial Uncle mean by this? Master, tell me quickly. Zhang Kongyun saw that she was chattering like a sparrow, and he was not in the mood to enjoy the chess game. He couldn't help but turn around and glare at her, shouting, "What are you chattering about? Just who taught you this, disciple? How did you become like this? You don't have any stability at all." Zhang Lufang made a face at him and said, "How refreshing. Am I not your disciple? Like teacher, like disciple." There was a faint smile on Zhang Kongyun's face and he scolded, "Nonsense. Don't say it. Don't a true gentleman understand that watching chess is silent?" Zhang Lufang grabbed Zhang Kongyun's arm and shook it hard. She said coquettishly, "Oh master, tell me, I don't understand." Zhang Kongyun felt a headache coming on. He smiled bitterly and said, Okay, stop shaking." He pointed to the chessboard in the sky and said, "This avalanche is dangerous and unpredictable. How can it be seen in a short time? If Li Yundong makes a mistake, he may lose the whole game. If Sherbo leader makes a mistake, it is possible that all his efforts will be wasted." Zhang Lufang exclaimed in realization. "Ah, I understand now. I see." But she soon widened her eyes and said, "That's not right, master. It's the same as if you didn't say anything." Zhang Kongyun flicked his finger on Zhang Liufang's forehead and glared at her. "It's good that you know. Don't talk nonsense." Zhang Lufang held her forehead, pouted, and looked resentful. She looked up at the sky and saw chess pieces appearing one after another in the clouds. On the huge chessboard in the sky, each chess piece looked magnificent, charming, and dazzling. At first glance, the game in the sky was really magnificent, and it had the momentum of a tiger. Zhang Lufang muttered to herself, "What does it feel like to play chess in the sky?" She secretly ran the jinqi in her body and pointed her finger at the sky to release her own jinqi. However, there was only a soft sound on her finger, and a white light visible to the naked eye sprayed out about 3 or 4 meters away before disappearing. Obviously, the jinqi could no longer condense and dissipated in the air a few meters away. Zhang Lufang secretly stuck out her tongue. Looking at the huge chessboard in the sky, she couldn't help but be speechless. She thought to herself, "My God, how profound is his cultivation of magic power to be able to draw chess pieces in the sky?" Thinking of this, Zhang Lufang couldn't help looking at the chessboard in the sky with a little more awe. Zhang Kongyun seemed to know what she was feeling. At this time he couldn't help sighing. He touched his chest and praised, "The sky is the chessboard and the clouds are the chess pieces. What a spirit! What a momentum! It's magnificent and magnificent. No matter who wins this game, it will be recorded in the history of our cultivation world. Mount Longhu will have another good story to be recorded in the history of our cultivation world." The two of them stood on the ground, pointing at each other and talking, but Ziyuan was shocked. She saw that after Li Yundong had made 70 or 80 moves, his speed had obviously slowed down. She cried in her heart that it was not good. She knew Li Yundong very well. She knew that Li Yundong was a person who would become stronger when he met strong opponents. He was soft on the outside but hard on the inside. If he hadn't been in a desperate situation, he would never have reacted like this. At this time, Li Yundong was indeed at the end of his rope. It was not that his cultivation of spiritual energy was not profound, but that the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. If he had Ziyuan's help, he might have been able to defeat Zhang Tianshi on the chessboard. However, Li Yundong would rather lose openly than win in a despicable way. After putting down 2 more pieces, he couldn't help but look back at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao helplessly. He let out a long sigh and said, "Jinren Zhang, good trick. I lost." There was a long silence in Zhang Tianshi's cave abode before a voice came out. It was obvious that he was a little tired. "Aha, Jinren Li, you have to think it through. If you admit defeat from now on, the name Invincible Li will not live up to its name." Li Yundong raised his eyebrows, smiled slightly and said, "There is no Bodhi tree, and the mirror is not a platform. There is nothing in the beginning, so where is the dust? What's there to miss about such a false reputation?" Hearing this, Zhang Tianshi was silent for a moment, and then he laughed out loud. "Good. As expected of Tianzuan, there is nothing in the beginning, so where is the dust? Invincible Li deserves to be Invincible Li. He deserves to be a master of both Buddhism and Taoism. With this sentence, he deserves the title of Invincible. If you don't have the heart to win, no one in the world can compete with you. Good. For this sentence I have to play a big white." Li Yundong chuckled. Although he had lost, he knew that he had not lost the game. He raised his hand and casually wiped it twice in the air. The huge chessboard in the sky was immediately scattered by him, and the clouds were in chaos. Many cultivators watching the chess game on the peak of Mount Longhu couldn't help but sigh in unison. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, the two sisters who didn't understand chess, saw Li Yundong wipe his hand a few times in front of him, and the clouds in the sky tens of thousands of miles away were wiped away by him. This kind of cultivation Shintong was simply shocking and incredible. Although they had seen Li Yundong's Shintong several times, they were still shocked and dumbfounded at this time. Li Yundong wiped away the chessboard and said with a smile, "Jinren Zhang, do you also drink?" Zhang Tianshi smiled and said, "Wine and meat go through the intestines, and the Jinren Dharma stays in the heart." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Is Jinren Zhang also a dual cultivator of Buddhism and Taoism?" This sentence was derived from Ji Gong's poem, "Wine and meat go through the intestines, but the Buddha stays in the heart." Li Yundong teased him. Zhang Tianshi said with a smile, "I don't dare to show off in front of the reincarnated Wisdom King." He laughed for a while and then said, "Jinren Li, although you lost this game you actually won. Do you know why?" Li Yundong asked back, "Please enlighten me, Jinren Zhang." Zhang Tianshi said with a smile, "Jinren Li is not only a great Jinren, but also a true gentleman. If you ask Ziyuan to help you play chess, I'm afraid you won't be able to win this game. Do you really think that the outcome of our game is really in the chessboard?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, "Sure enough. As the leader of the Jingyi school, Zhang Tianshi has used shameless means one after another. There must be a reason for it. Now it seems that it is true. It seems that the outcome of this game of chess is in the chessboard, but if I really get entangled in the outcome of the chessboard, even if I win in the end, I'm afraid that in the end I will still lose and lose without being defeated. Now it seems that I have won without being defeated?" Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh and say, "Jinren Zhang is broad-minded and broad-minded. I admire you." Zhang Tianshi laughed and said, "You're flattering me. Since you are a true gentleman, why don't you come into the stone room and meet me?" Li Yundong was slightly shocked. Zhang Tianshi had been in seclusion for 10 years and hadn't seen anyone. Even when the mystical silver fox was making trouble and the cultivation world was about to be destroyed, he hadn't made a move. He could endure the Shintian sect's attack. What was the reason for this? Thinking of this, Li Yundong said without hesitation, "That's my wish. I don't dare to invite you." Zhang Tianshi laughed. As soon as he finished laughing, a stone door suddenly cracked open on the wall of the cave. Li Yundong didn't doubt him. He turned his head and nodded to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao with a smile, saying, "Wait for me here. I'll go in and meet your Shirshu." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao watched Li Yundong stride into the cave, wanting to say something but hesitating. Li Yundong walked into the cave. As soon as he entered the stone cave, the stone door behind him closed automatically. He looked around and saw that the light in the cave was extremely dim. Only 2 or 3 meters deep in the cave, a ray of sunlight leaked down from the top of the cave and shone on Zhang Tianshi. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that Zhang Tianshi's face was like jade, his eyebrows were as thick as ink, and his eyes were as bright as stars. He was leaning against the wall and sitting on the stone bed, smiling at him slightly. However, under his body the Taoist robe between his legs was empty. Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, "No way, Zhang Tianshi is actually a cripple with his lower body amputated and paralyzed in bed?" Sorry, it's even later. Recently I've been really too busy. It seems that I haven't written a long chapter of more than 4,000 words for a long time. Chapter 968. Although Li Yundong had a strong self-control, he was shocked to see Zhang Tianshi with only half of his body left. He widened his eyes and cried out involuntarily, "Jinren Zhang Yu." However, Zhang Tianshi's expression remained the same. He stretched out his hand, bowed and said with a smile, "Jinren Li, thank you." Li Yundong returned the salute and said in surprise, "Jinren Zhang, you haven't come out of seclusion for the past 10 years. Is it because—" Li Yundong swallowed his words and didn't say anything else. Zhang Tianshi smiled and said, "Jinren Li, why do you think I lost my legs?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "Destiny is not my strong point. I can't guess." Zhang Tianshi grabbed the empty clothes below his waist and smiled. Although his smile was open-minded, it revealed a sense of vicissitudes and helplessness. He said, "From the moment I was born, I was instilled with the idea of promoting Jingyi school and restoring the glory of our school. Unfortunately, during the Republic of China period, our Jingyi school stood on the wrong side one after another. In the end, the atheists who believed in the Communist Party seized the world. From that moment on, Zhang Enpu, the leader of our Jingyi school, knew that the end of Dharma was coming. From then on, he tried his best to preserve the strength of our school and told the future disciples of our school to compromise and find the right time to make a comeback." Celestial Master Zhang said slowly. Every word revealed the helplessness under the torrent of history. Every sentence revealed the vicissitudes of the great era. Even a great cultivator like him could not transcend the changes of the dynasties and the changes of the world. He could not escape from the customs. Zhang Tianshi said, in the early days of the founding of New China, our Jingyi sect was caught in a fierce internal strife. Because our Jingyi sect had always been with the Kuomintang, and later the Kuomintang seized the country, many people in the sect insisted on going to Taiwan with the Kuomintang. Some people thought that we should stick to the ancestral court and not leave. At the same time, some people suggested that we should cross the ocean and leave this troublesome place. They thought that China had fallen into the end of the age of Dharma, and there would be a great calamity in the future. Those who stayed would suffer greatly. If there's a way out, I'll definitely go to a foreign country. Speaking of this, Zhang Tianshi lowered his head and smiled slightly. He said with great emotion, when I first heard this, I was still young and didn't take it seriously. I thought that no matter who sat on the throne in the world, in the end, they would still have to rely on our Jingyi school. Our celestial master Zhang's clan is known as a 1,000-year-old aristocratic family, with Zhang in the south and Kong in the north. How could it be a joke? But it turns out that I was wrong, very wrong. Zhang Tianshi sighed and said with a heavy breath, you know what happened later. Our Jingyi school was divided into 3 factions. One faction followed Chiang Kai-shek of the Kuomintang to Taiwan, and the one who left was Zhang Enpu, the current leader of our Jingyi school. The other faction took some of the backbone and left for a foreign country. It was Zhang Tianfang, the founder of the Shintian sect. The rest were the most useless and hopeless group of people, and I was forced to be the leader. As Zhang Tianshi spoke, he smiled at Li Yundong and said, at that time I was just a child. My cultivation was low and my experience was shallow. No one was convinced by me, let alone those Shishu and Sherboy in Taiwan or overseas. When I took over the Jingyi school, it was an unprecedented mess, but after so many years of painstaking management, I finally managed to manage the Jingyi school a little bit, especially when I found a rare genius. Zhang Tianshi's eyes lit up. He stared at Li Yundong and said, do you know who I'm talking about? Li Yundong listened attentively. His heart skipped a beat and he asked tentatively, Wang Yuanshan? Zhang Tianshi laughed and nodded approvingly at Li Yunyang, saying, yes, it's Wang Yuanshan. His talent is extremely high, far above mine. In time, his cultivation will definitely reach the peak, enough to carry forward the glory of our Jingyi school. Li Yundong couldn't help sighing and said, Jinren Zhang, is a person's strength really that important? Zhang Tianshi said disapprovingly, of course. Throughout the 5,000 years of Chinese history, the rise of a country, a religion, and a sect all rose because of the rise of one person, and all became strong because of the strength of one person. The Qin dynasty had Xiangyang, so the 7 countries dominated. The Han dynasty had Emperor Wu, so his prestige shook the distant countries. The Tang dynasty had Emperor Taizong, so he came from all directions. The Yuan dynasty had Temujin, so his iron hooves trampled all over Europe. The Ming dynasty had Zhu Di, so it had a strong Ming. A country is like this, a religion is like this, a sect is like this, and even a family is like this. Jinren Li, if you hadn't inexplicably inherited the position of leader of the Fox Zen school, I'm afraid that it would have been destroyed long ago. You can't deny this fact, can you? Li Yundong was silent for a while. Although he agreed in his heart, he felt more helpless and sighed. It was also because of this that China had always been a society ruled by people, not a society ruled by law. From beginning to end, it was people who managed the country, not a sound legal system. When the people who managed it were wise and powerful, no one in the world could stop the Chinese people from sweeping everything. When the people who managed it were stupid, the Chinese people would fall into complete chaos and internal strife. Li Yundong was deep in thought, but Zhang Tianshi didn't notice it. He continued to say with some emotion, after I found Wang Yuanshan, I immediately decided to help him cultivate with everything I had. Wang Yuanshan lived up to my expectations and became the youngest Jingxian master in the Chinese cultivation world. But, the world is changeable and fate is unpredictable. I didn't expect that he was destined to have a love tribulation. Li Yundong blurted out, Ao Wushuang? Zhang Tianshi nodded and said, yes. This 7-tailed fox spirit disrupted all my arrangements. She made Wang Yuanshan resolutely abandon my high regard for him and the heavy burden of the sect. In the end he betrayed the sect. When Zhang Tianshi said this, his expression was extremely gloomy, as if he was still upset, guilty, sad about Wang Yuanshan's matter. He said slowly, you know what happened later. But after I caught him 10 years ago and decided to seal him up, I knew that I could no longer rely on him. I had to find another way out. Although I knew that there would be one catastrophe after another in the Chinese cultivation world 10 years later, and that our Jingyi school would also face great disasters, all of this was predestined. It was reincarnation, karma, and fate. But I was unwilling. I wanted to try to go against heaven. I wanted to use my own strength to change the world. Celestial Master Zhang let out a deep laugh, his hand grabbing the robe around his legs. Li Yundong saw this and his heart skipped a beat. He had already understood something. Sure enough, Zhang Tianshi continued to say, I'm not very talented, and I can be said to be a little clumsy. The reason why I can reach this realm today is very simple. It's nothing more than hard work. Zhang Tianshi smiled and said, there are some things that can be made up for by hard work, but some people who work hard for a lifetime can't compare to some people who cultivate for a year. As Zhang Tianshi spoke, he looked at Li Yundong with a smile in his eyes and said, Jinrenli, don't you think so? Li Yundong knew that Zhang Tianshi was talking about him. He bowed slightly and said, I don't dare. Jinren Zhang, are you being too hasty? Zhang Tianshi smiled and said, being too hasty? That's right, isn't he being too hasty? In order to break through to the Thunder Retribution realm as soon as possible, I ended up being possessed by the devil and my lower body was completely paralyzed. Li Yundong said curiously, but, Jinren Zhang you... Li Yundong looked at Zhang Tianshi's empty Taoist robe with a face full of doubts. Even if he had been possessed by the devil, he wouldn't have lost both of his legs, would he? Zhang Tianshi guessed what Li Yundong was thinking. He smiled and said, at that time I was possessed by the devil and half of my body was paralyzed. My legs were completely reduced to rotten flesh. If I kept them, I would have to spend a part of my spiritual power and jinqi on them every day, so I simply cut them off myself. Li Yundong was shocked. He was already very shocked when he saw Yanfang cut off her own family jewels, but he hadn't expected that Zhang Tianshi would cut off both of his legs. What kind of boldness was that? Li Yundong looked at Zhang Tianshi with his mouth agape and was speechless for a moment. However, Zhang Tianshi smiled casually and said, it's all in the past. Jinrenli, I haven't seen anyone for 10 years. Do you know why I called you in today apart from telling you this? Li Yundong shook his head and asked, please enlighten me, Jinren Zhang. Zhang Tianshi smiled and said, in the chess game just now, I believe that Jinrenli is a gentleman and will not take advantage of others, so I have a favor to ask of you. Li Yundong was shocked. If Zhang Tianshi had something to ask of him, then it must be a serious matter. He couldn't help asking, what is it? As long as I can help, I won't refuse. Zhang Tianshi smiled and his expression became serious. He said, Jinrenli, I once calculated that there are 2 disasters in the Chinese cultivation world that we can't avoid. One is the resurrection of the black fox, and the other is the devil dance. Our Jingyi school will soon face a disaster. We escaped the disaster in the resurrection of the black fox, but I don't know if we can avoid it next time. And I'm about to die. If Jinrenli is still in the world in the future, if it's convenient, you might as well take care of the Jingyi school. Please. After that, Zhang Tianshi bowed deeply. Li Yundong quickly stepped forward and helped him up. He said, Jinren Zhang, what are you talking about? In this Dharma-ending era, the cultivators of the world are one family. When the disaster comes, we should help each other. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he asked, Jinren Zhang, what about Deng Yu and Deng Jiao? Zhang Tianshi laughed and said, don't worry, Jinrenli. I will definitely make proper arrangements for this matter. Hearing this, Li Yundong was relieved. Finally, he had not been busy in vain. He thought for a moment. Although he felt that it was a little too much to take advantage of, he still said, Jinren Zhang, that Ziyuan. Before he could finish speaking, Zhang Tianshi shook his head and said, Jinrenli, I can't help you with this matter. The country has its laws and the sect has its dogma. Ziyuan has violated the rules of the sect, so she will definitely be punished, but I won't lock her up. I should expel her from the sect. Speaking of this, Zhang Tianshi raised his head, looked at Li Yundong sincerely and said, Jinrenli, why don't you start your own sect? With your strength and cultivation, it's enough for you to establish a sect in the Chinese cultivation world and establish your own mountain. Li Yundong was stunned. This was not the first time someone had mentioned this matter in front of him. In the past, it was usually the people around him who had mentioned it. Although Li Yundong had thought about it, he had not seriously considered it. However, this time, it was an important figure in the Chinese cultivation world who had mentioned it. Li Yundong thought to himself, maybe it's really time to set up my own sect. Uneasy face. Chapter 969. A long time after Li Yundong left, Zhang Tianshi said to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were still waiting for news outside, Deng Yu, Deng Jiao. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao trembled and said in unison, Sect leader Shi Shu. Li Yundong and Zhang Tianshi played a game of chess on the main peak of Mount Longhu with the sky as the chessboard and the clouds as the chess pieces. Although it didn't last long, it was majestic and intense, which still shocked the two sisters. They saw that Li Yundong had not come out of the main door after entering and were muttering in their hearts. When they heard Zhang Tianshi's voice, they suddenly became nervous and waited for their fate to be announced. Bubble Zhang Tianshi's voice was calm, and the two little girls couldn't detect how angry he was. Zhang Tianshi said, Deng Yu, Deng Jiao, you two let Ziyuan go without authorization, which has violated the rules of our Jingyi school. You should be confined for 10 years and then expelled from the sect. Although Li Yundong pleaded for you, there are laws in the country and rules in the family. You can't do anything without rules. You should pack up your things now and go down the mountain quickly. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Deng Jiao suddenly raised her head and exclaimed, Sect leader martial uncle, everything is my fault. It has nothing to do with my sister. Sect leader martial uncle, please be merciful and don't punish my sister. Let her stay. Zhang Tianshi snorted and said, It's understandable and unforgivable. You two don't have to say any more. Hurry down the mountain and find a famous teacher. There's no place for you on Mount Longhu anymore. Deng Yu was shocked at first and subconsciously wanted to beg for mercy, but she bit her lip and swallowed the words that had rushed to her mouth. She grabbed Deng Jiao, who was still begging, and said, Sister, don't say any more. Let's go. Deng Jiao's eyes were filled with tears. She turned her head and said, But? Deng Yu winked at her and said, Sister, sect leader Shi Shu has already asked us to go down the mountain and find a famous teacher. Didn't you hear him? Deng Jiao was stunned for a moment, but she quickly reacted. Her body was pulled by Deng Yu and she couldn't help but lie down. Deng Yu said, Sect leader Shi Shu, please allow us to call you that for the last time. We'll go first. You, take care. Celestial Master Zhang leaned against the wall. Seeing that Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had understood what he was implying, he could not help but smile. He had always been worried that these two girls would stubbornly refuse to leave Mount Longhu. If that were to happen, all of his plans would be for naught. Now that the two girls were clever and quick-witted, they quickly understood his intentions and obediently left. This was simply a joyous occasion for everyone. Zhang would be. With that, Tian Yu Jiao Yundong Yu Jiao Yu and Yundong, after Deng Yu and Deng Jiao left the Immortal Dawn Cave, they went to the side hall of the Celestial Master Mansion and found Zhang Ling to bid farewell. However, Zhang Ling was not there, so the two of them could only bid farewell to their senior brothers and sisters. Although the two of them had not been on Mount Longhu for a long time, they were not only as beautiful as flowers, but also as extremely rare twin lotus flowers. Although their temperaments were different, they were extremely likable. There was no one in the Jingyi school who did not like them. At this time, seeing that they were going to leave the mountain, no one dared to ask them to stay, although they were reluctant. After all, this was an order from Zhang Tianshi himself. Among them, Zhang Lufang, who had the best relationship with them, sent them all the way down the mountain. The inner disciple of the Jingyi school held hands and looked at each other with tears in her eyes. While wiping her tears, she said to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, You two must remember to come to see me often in the future. The first time Deng Yu and Deng Jiao saw this world after they were reborn was in the Jingyi school of Mount Longhu. Although they knew that it was not Mount Longhu that saved their lives, they still had a strong sense of belonging to Mount Longhu. This was like a small animal that had just broken out of its shell. The first thing it saw would subconsciously be its mother. It was also like if a child was taken care of by another person for a long time and did not stay by his mother's side, after a long time, he would also be separated from his mother. The sisters were also crying. They each took Zhang Liufang's hand and kept nodding, saying, Yes, Shiji Lufang, you must come to see us often in the future. Zhang Lufang wiped her tears and said, Where can I go to see you? This question stumped both Deng Yu and Deng Jiao. Both of them were stunned at the same time. Seeing them like this, Zhang Lufang couldn't help but feel even more sad for them. Yes, where will they go in the future? Go home. But they had been dead for almost a year, and the public security organ had removed their files. They were already dead people in the mortal world. Now that they had reappeared, how could they explain it to their parents? Could they say that they had met Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling of the Linggong sect, saved Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's lives, and then were reborn in Mount Longhu? Even Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's own parents wouldn't believe it, would they? If this got out, would they be sent to a mental hospital in the future? Would I have to go to a mental hospital to see them in the future? At this time the two sisters were also crying and Zhang Lufang also cried. She became more and more sad and tears fell down her cheeks. Zhang Lufang comforted them, "Don't be sad. The world is so big, where can't you go? In my opinion you might as well go to Li Wudi. Don't you have a good relationship with him? I think he will take you in for the sake of your friendship in the past." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other at this time and their hearts moved. They quickly broke into smiles, wiped their tears and said to Zhang Lufang, "Shiji Liufang's words make sense. After we go down the mountain we will go to him." Zhang Lufang originally thought that she would have to persuade them for a long time, but she didn't expect the two sisters to be so obedient. She was a little tongue-tied and didn't know what to say for a while. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao took Zhang Liufang's hand and said intimately, "Shiji Lufang will go first. You can go back first. We'll come to see you often in the future." Zhang Lufang waved her hand in a daze, then watched the two sisters walk away hand in hand. When the two of them disappeared, Zhang Lufang was a little tongue-tied and said, "They're really happy-go-lucky, huh? Have they calmed down so quickly? Amazing." Zhang Lufang didn't know that as soon as Zhang Tianshi had asked Deng Yu and Deng Jiao to go down the mountain, Deng Yu had immediately reacted. She recalled the hidden meaning of Zhang Tianshi's words, "Go down the mountain and find a good teacher." The two sisters were connected. One reacted quickly and the other reacted very quickly. Therefore, although they were a little sad, it was not as serious as Zhang Lufang had thought. After Deng Yu and Deng Jiao went down the mountain, they looked back at the foot of the mountain, only to see that the Taoist master's mansion had been hidden in the mountains and forests. They couldn't see the carved railings and jade walls, but they could see the faint rising of incense. Although it was not very vigorous, it was always faintly discernible and had not been cut off. For a moment, the two sisters were filled with emotion. They knelt down and respectfully kowtowed 3 times, then turned and left hand in hand. Not long after the two of them left, Zhang Ling received the news that Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had left. The impatient lady of the earthly fire suddenly flew into a rage. She immediately wanted to chase after Han Xan, but as soon as she moved she was stopped by the other disciples of the Jingyi school, who said that this was an order from Zhang Tianshi. Zhang Ling was so angry that her head was dizzy. She stomped her feet and went straight to the immortal glow cave. From afar she shouted angrily, "Shidi, are you crazy? Why did you really expel Deng Yu and Deng Jiao from the sect? Just punish them with a period of confinement. Shidi, how many good seedlings are left in our Jingyi school now? It was not easy to find these two, but you..." Zhang Tianshi seemed to have been waiting for Zhang Ling to come to him and say these words. He didn't wait for Zhang Ling to finish speaking, so he sighed in a deep voice and said, "Shiji, do you think I don't understand what you are saying? Those who know me say that I am worried, and those who don't know me say that I want something. You don't have to say it. You will understand what I mean in the future." Zhang Ling knew that although her Shidi's talent was not top-notch compared to the previous leaders, he was experienced and prudent in doing things. He would think twice before he acted, and there must be a deep meaning in everything he did. She gradually calmed down and asked, "Shidi, did you let them go for the sake of our Jingyi school?" Zhang Tianshi was silent for a while, then sighed and said, "Shiji, I have done what I should do. The rest is up to fate. In the future, I will have to trouble you to take care of the affairs of the sect." Zhang Ling ran over angrily to denounce Celestial Master Zhang, but her anger dissipated with just a few words from Celestial Master Zhang. Although she still had doubts in her heart, she finally stopped asking. She sighed and glanced at the cave abode with some doubt and worry. She faintly felt that there was something wrong with Zhang Tianshi's voice and tone, but she couldn't tell what was wrong. She had to turn around and leave with a heavy heart. After Zhang Tianshi sent away the sisters Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, as well as his Shiji Zhang Ling, he looked up at the sky and muttered to himself, "There's not much time left. There's still one last thing left." After that he took a deep breath. The Jin Shenyang spirit came out of its shell and flew in the direction of Dongwu City. At this time in the distant Dongwu City, Yen Fong was quietly hiding in a street in the old city of Suzhou. She was silent and motionless like a cold stone. But in Yen Fong's heart, it was beating violently, burning and burning. The news that the Qingquan Rui mirror was with her had inadvertently spread. She believed that it would not be long before all the cultivators in the world knew that she had this coveted powerful magical weapon. At that time, countless people would flock to her. In such a dilemma, Yen Fong knew that she couldn't wait like this. She had no way out, so she had to make a last stand. This cold and tenacious cultivator waited quietly in the corner of the alley until a graceful and beautiful figure appeared gracefully. Yin Fang looked over and saw that this person had an oval face and a cherry mouth. She had a delicate and charming face. It was the only disciple she had accepted in the past 10 years, Song Yuqiao. Chapter 970. Yin Fang hid the treasure and Yuqiao was robbed. Song Yuqiao walked gracefully from the entrance of the street. She had a delicate and timid face, beautiful and lovely. At this time she was wearing a thin yellow cotton-padded jacket and a pair of navy blue patterned cotton pants. Although it was early spring and she had a little more clothes on her body, it still couldn't hide her graceful figure. Song Yuqiao's slender waist bent 3 times with each step. Although her face was calm, there seemed to be a kind of shyness hidden between her eyebrows, which made people want to protect her. Song Yuqiao walked slowly. Every step was very slow and light, like a vigilant little rabbit. As long as there was the slightest movement, she would immediately run away. Ever since Song Yuqiao had broken down and fled under the tremendous pressure in the Taoist assembly, she had been hiding for a long time. It was not until she felt that things had calmed down that she came out again. Song Yuqiao was different from other cultivators. She was not a cultivator in the strict sense of the word. Yin Fang had accepted her as a disciple purely by chance. There was only a master-disciple relationship, and there was no gratitude for teaching her. When Yin Fang had been lurking in the Fox Zen school and disguised as Mo Ashi, she had come to Dongwu City to investigate Ao Wushuang and met this typical Jiangnan woman, Song Yuqiao. In this world, so long as a girl was slightly beautiful, there would more or less be a boy pestering her and attracting the attention of bees and butterflies. However, if she was born with a natural beauty and always carried a trace of shyness and timidity between her brows, it would arouse the tender affection of others, and she had an extremely weak character. It was simply enough to make most men go crazy. Song Yuqiao was such a person. She was not as charming as Su Chan, not as otherworldly as Zi Yuan, not as generous as Zhou Qin, not as coquettish as Chao Kefi, not as lively and lovely as Zhang Lufang, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, but there was a desire in her bones that made people want to protect her, love her, and even destroy her. If a girl like her had been born in a rich family like Zhou Qin and had a strong background, she might have lost a lot of freedom, but her life would have been smooth and she would not have been troubled by always having lechers around her. However, she had been born in a poor family. Her father had died early, and her mother was an old Pingtan artist in Dongwu City. Although her attainments were not shallow, and her authentic Dongwu dialect and old-school singing were unique, under the impact of the market economy, the Pingtan business was deteriorating, and the family's livelihood was very difficult. Children from poor families took charge of the family early, so Song Yuqiao had dropped out of school early and learned Pingtan from her mother. Then at a young age she appeared in public and sang Pingshu and opera. For such a beautiful girl like her to appear in public all day long, she was simply like a delicate little rabbit running around in the forest all day long. As the saying goes, if you walk too much at night, you will run into ghosts. If you stay in the forest for a long time, you will run into wolves sooner or later. Song Yuqiao's beauty had finally attracted the attention of some unscrupulous people. However, although the little girl was young and shy, she had a firm opinion on major issues and would never entangle herself with these shady people. Therefore, these unscrupulous people wanted to use force out of shame and anger. When Song Yuqiao was caught by them and struggled in vain, she met Yin Fang in despair. At a young age, Song Yuqiao saw a movie and TV for the first time. The so-called immortals in the romance of the Song dynasty appeared in front of her. She was impressed by Yin Fang's amazing skills, and a thought emerged in the depths of her heart. If I can have such skills, my mother and I will not be bullied in the future. Therefore, Song Yuqiao immediately fell to her knees and begged Yin Fang to accept her as a disciple. Yin Fang was a rare beauty. 10 years ago, she was known as the first beauty in the Chinese cultivation world, and all beauties had very high standards. It was absolutely impossible for her to accept a disciple who was not beautiful. This was also why Wang Yuanshan had accepted 2 disciples, while she had not accepted any before. There was no other reason than that she didn't like them. However, when Yin Fang saw Song Yuqiao for the first time, she was attracted by her appearance and pitiful temperament. She took advantage of the situation and accepted her as a disciple. After that, she had been lurking in the Fox Zen school and had no chance to teach this disciple. She had only taught her a few talismans to protect herself. She felt a little sorry, so after thinking about it, she simply let her join the Gizao sect of the external alchemy. On the one hand, she could enter the external alchemy and add a chess eye for her own layout. On the other hand, she hoped that Song Yuqiao could learn some magic in the external alchemy to make up for her guilt a little. However, Yin Fang did not expect that life would not go her way. 9 out of 10, the chess piece she had painstakingly cultivated would collapse at the last moment because she could not bear the huge pressure and turn to escape. What Song Yuqiao didn't expect was that after she thought she had escaped, her master would catch up with her and punish her, but in the end her master didn't catch up with her. What was even more unexpected was that she thought she had hidden in the end and didn't show up, so her master and those terrible people at the Taoist assembly couldn't find her. But in the end she was still found by Yin Fang. Yin Fang had never thought of looking for Song Yuqiao before because in her opinion, this disciple was really a little disappointing and useless. She was not like herself at all. She did not have a ruthless and indomitable spirit, so she planned to end the relationship with Song Yuqiao in this way. But when she found the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror and found that she was not the destined master of the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror, she began to think about a question. How should she deal with this supreme magic treasure? Take it with her? That would be courting death. Hide it in a place. But where should she hide it? If she hid it in a deserted place, she was afraid that it would be taken away by someone accidentally. Yin Fang was a paranoid and manipulative woman. If she fell in love with a man, she must have him. If she had something very important, she must carry it with her all day long. She wished she could see it all the time. At the very least, she must put it in a place where she could rest assured. Therefore, after thinking about it for a long time, Yin Fang finally thought of Song Yuqiao. Yin Fang knew Song Yuqiao very well. She knew that she was an extremely filial daughter and would never be far away from her mother. She also knew that she was cautious and not greedy, so she decided to hide the powerful magic treasure with Song Yuqiao. But she was afraid that there would be a mishap, so she did not tell Song Yuqiao. She just hid the powerful magic treasure in Song Yuqiao's home and left a note. If one day Song Yuqiao accidentally found this note, she would help her keep it out of the original relationship between master and disciple. She would not rashly sell it. Song Yuqiao didn't expect that Yin Fang would hide such a terrible time bomb beside her without her knowing it. She walked gently on the antique bluestone floor all the way to the end of the alley and came to a house with white walls and black tiles. She opened the wooden door and copper lock on the left and right side of the door. After pushing the door open, she came to a yard. What was different from usual was that as soon as Song Yuqiao entered the house, she saw a middle-aged man in a Taoist robe standing in the yard. This middle-aged man was quite handsome, and he had a wisp of beard under his chin, which made him look a little elegant. He stood in the yard with empty hands, looking with interest at some vegetables and a few poultry strolling in the yard. It was not until Song Yuqiao came in that his eyes fell on her. Song Yuqiao was shocked. She looked at the Taoist priest who had suddenly appeared with vigilance and timidity. She subconsciously took a step back and whispered timidly, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" This middle-aged man was none other than Yin Kong, who had followed Yin Fang here. Yin Fang had been waiting here for a long time, and he had also been patient. Anyone who could cultivate to the Jinshin phase was a person of great wisdom. They were extremely smart and had amazing reactions. When he saw that Yin Fang had been hiding in this old street and staring at this house, he more or less understood something in his heart. Especially when he saw Song Yuqiao appear, Yin Fang's aura had obviously changed, and he was even more enlightened. Therefore, before Yin Fang appeared, he took the initiative to enter the yard without anyone noticing. Yin Kong looked at Song Yuqiao with a smile, and there was a touch of surprise in his eyes. In his opinion, Song Yuqiao was a natural furnace, a good material and a beautiful jade. He couldn't help but love talent again. However, compared with the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror, he valued powerful magical weapons more, so he suppressed his love for talent a little. Yin Kong smiled slightly and said, "What a beautiful little girl. Her eyebrows are clear, her eyes are pure, and she has no distracting thoughts. No wonder you left the powerful magical weapon with her. No wonder, no wonder." Song Yuqiao was confused by his words and couldn't help but ask timidly, "What are you talking about? Who the hell are you? If you don't tell me, I will shout. I will shout." Yin Kong laughed and said, "What a naive little girl. If I tell you my name, will you stop shouting?" Song Yuqiao was stunned when she heard this and her pretty face turned red. She said timidly, "If you are a good person, I won't shout. If you are a bad person, I will still shout." Yin Kong laughed. His voice was not loud, but it shook the soles of Song Yuqiao's feet. She thought to herself, this person should be a cultivator like master, right? Why did he come here? Song Yuqiao was timid and afraid, so she involuntarily retracted her hand into her sleeve and tightly held a talisman that had been hidden close to her body. It was the 5 Thunder Righteous talisman that Li Yundong had used to attract the heavenly thunder. Seeing that Song Yuqiao was speaking naively, Yin Kong couldn't help laughing. His figure flashed, and in an instant he appeared next to Song Yuqiao. He pressed his palm on the top of her head and said in a clear voice, "Yen Fong, if you don't show up, I'm afraid your precious disciple won't be able to see the sun tomorrow." What? Chapter 971. When Yin Kong's palm pressed on the top of Song Yuqiao's head, the beautiful girl of Dongwu City trembled with fear. She hadn't expected that after hiding for a long time, everything would come to her in the end. Her teeth kept chattering and she shouted in horror in her heart, "I'm dead, I'm dead." The little girl cried out in fear in her heart, but when she heard Yin Kong say the name of her master, Yen Fong, Song Yuqiao suddenly shivered, like a drowning person who had seen a life-saving straw. She grabbed it like crazy and did not move. Bubbles, Song Yuqiao shouted loudly, "Master, help, help." She was originally a pitiful little girl, extremely lovable. At this time, in a moment of desperation, she blurted out the Dongwu dialect. The Dongwu dialect was also known as Wu Nong soft language, and the illusion of Wu Nong soft language came from Chapter 76 of 20 Years of Observation of the Present Situation. The people they called to serve the wine were all from the southern troop. For a moment, the sound of birds chirping was all Wu Nong soft language. The biggest characteristics of Wu Nong soft language were that it was soft, crisp, sticky, and soft. Especially for girls, especially young and beautiful girls, when they spoke Wu Nong soft language, they really got the essence of the 4 words soft, crisp, sticky, and soft. In the Ming and Qing dynasties, Jinling and Gusu were famous places of prosperity for thousands of years, with hundreds of miles of gentleness. The girls of Gusu were famous all over the world. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, there were not many famous prostitutes from Gusu, but the Wu Nong soft language from Shuiqing spread all over the world. All the prostitutes in the 8 great hutongs of Beijing were proud of speaking Wu Nong soft language. If they could not speak Wu Nong soft language fluently, they would not be regarded as famous prostitutes, and they would even be embarrassed to say hello to people when they went out. If outsiders entered the brothels of the 8 great hutongs, it was guaranteed that they would be full of soft Wu Nong soft language, and those who did not know would think that they had come to the land of Dongwu. Even in Beijing during the Republic of China period, the famous prostitutes in the 8 great alleys still spoke fluent Dongwu Chinese. When they met, they were outstanding beauties with red lips and white teeth, and when they opened their mouths, they spoke in soft Wu Nong language. It was really breathtaking and tempting to see them. If Song Yuqiao had been born in ancient times, she would have been a famous prostitute who could have left her mark in history. She was born with a good voice. Her voice was clear and soft. Even if she didn't sing and just spoke softly, she seemed to be able to stretch out an invisible hook and accurately hook a man's throbbing heartstrings. Yin Kong had cultivated for decades, but he had never seen such a beautiful woman. When he first saw her, he was moved. He loved her talent and couldn't bear to hurt her. At this time, when he heard her call him in such a soft Wu Nong language, he really felt sorry for her. Even though he had cultivated for many years and his mind was as firm as iron, he couldn't help but be moved and almost lost his Taoist heart. Yin Kong couldn't help but say to Song Yuqiao kindly, "Little girl, don't shout, be obedient. As long as your master is obedient and returns the things of our Jingyi school to me, I won't hurt you." In all fairness, not only was Yin Kong not ugly, but he could also be considered handsome. However, he had appeared in the wrong place at the wrong time. Song Yuqiao's first impression of him was that he was a big villain. At this time, even if he explained it to her, she would never believe it. Although Song Yuqiao was always timid and didn't seem to have an idea, she was actually very determined in her heart. At the Taoist assembly, when Yen Fong had forced her like this, she had been able to hold on to the kindness in the depths of her heart. In the end, she hadn't killed her and had turned around to escape. Therefore, how could the words of Yin Kong shake her mind? The little girl's tears rolled down, but deep in her heart, she firmly believed that although he looked like a good person, this uncle must be a bad person. Didn't all the bad guys in the movies and TV shows look like this? Seeing her tears rolling down her cheeks, Yin Kong couldn't help but reach out to help her wipe her tears. Song Yuqiao also seemed to be scared silly and didn't move at all. Seeing that she didn't struggle at all, Yin Kong felt that the little girl was more and more obedient in his heart. He said loudly, "Yen Fong, how long are you going to hide? Do you think that I don't know where you hid the things now? You've been waiting here for a long time and I've been waiting here for a long time. If you want to escape now, even though the sky is vast and the earth is thick, there's no place for you to hide. Why don't we get straight to the point and speak frankly? Isn't that better? After he said this, Yen Fong, who had been hiding in the dark corner of the alley, finally came out. As soon as she came out, Song Yuqiao was stunned. She couldn't help but stare at Yen Fong and say, "Who are you? You're not my master." Yin Kong raised his head and laughed, saying, "Little girl, although it's said that seeing is believing and hearing is believing, sometimes what you see is not necessarily true. But sometimes what you see on the surface may not be the truth." Yen Fong didn't even look at Song Yuqiao. She stared at Yin Kong as if she was facing a formidable enemy, like a vigilant female leopard, ready to pounce at any time. Yen Fong said coldly, "Senior, as the founder of the Jingyi school, don't you think it's dirty and shameless to use such despicable means?" Yin Kong said disapprovingly, "I just want the powerful magical weapon of our Jingyi school. How can it be dirty and shameless? Why don't you just hand it over obediently? I swear to the old ancestor of the three pure ones that I will never hurt you." Yen Fong sneered and said, "Will you let us go? Only a ghost would believe what you said." Yin Kong smiled slightly, raised one hand into a palm and swore, "Old ancestor of the three pure ones, the 63rd generation disciple of the Jingyi school and the 1st generation disciple of the Shantian sect, Yin Kong, swear here that as long as..." Before Yin Kong could finish his words, Yen Fong suddenly shouted, "Xiao Qiao, hurry up. Do it." Yen Fong's voice was already neither a man nor a woman. At this time she shouted at the top of her lungs, and her voice was so strange that it made people's hair stand on end. Yin Kong subconsciously turned his head and raised his hand to slap Song Yuqiao. But when Yin Kong slapped the air, he saw that Song Yuqiao was staring blankly ahead, motionless. Yin Kong suddenly laughed in his heart and thought to himself, "This little girl has never cultivated at all. How could she hurt me? I'm too nervous." But because of this delay, when he turned his head to look at Yen Fong had already disappeared without a trace. Yin Kong was not angry. He smiled, turned to Song Yuqiao and said, "Little girl, your master doesn't want you anymore. Come with me. I'll teach you a good kung fu skill. What do you think?" Song Yuqiao seemed to be scared out of her wits. She neither objected nor agreed. Yin Kong touched her hair and chuckled. He pressed his palm on her shoulder, moved and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After an unknown period of time, Yen Fong's figure slowly appeared in the same place. She had used the goddess Nyan seal to hide herself. She had played the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain and the cicada shedding its shell. She looked around and walked into the yard with great caution. She lifted a few floor tiles in the yard, revealing a patch of soil. She reached into the soil and touched it. When she reached out again, she found a bronze mirror. Yen Fong smiled. As soon as she stood up, there was a sudden puff. A horsetail whisk suddenly pierced through her chest, followed by a scream. It was Song Yuqiao's scream. The horsetail whisk was like the head of a spear, condensed with powerful jinqi. In the blink of an eye, it pierced through Yen Fong. Yin Kong laughed proudly. He stood behind Yen Fong, holding the horsetail whisk in one hand and pressing the other on Song Yuqiao's shoulder. He said, "How dare you play such a small trick in front of me? Humph, you really don't know." Before he could finish speaking, Yen Fong's body suddenly burned and turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. The smile on Yin Kong's face froze and a fierce wind came from behind him. Yin Kong was shocked. He didn't even have time to loosen his grip on the horsetail whisk. He suddenly withdrew his palm from Song Yuqiao's body, turned over and slapped her. Yin Kong seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. His fingers were like iron pincers, clamping a sharp sword. The sharp sword was a paper sword with all kinds of talismans drawn on it. The tip of the sword was sharp and shone with a faint light. It was Yen Fong who was holding the sword. Yen Fong's body was faintly emitting a very faint golden light. Obviously, she was only one step away from the Jinshin phase. She gritted her teeth and trembled all over, trying hard to stab the paper sword into Yin Kong's body. Although the paper sword looked very soft, Yin Kong knew that it was drawn with magic formations and talismans. It was so powerful that it could break the Jinshin once it touched blood. Yin Kong snorted angrily. His fingers that were clamping the sword tightened. He loosened his grip on the horsetail whisk and slowly turned around. His other empty hand slowly stretched out an index finger and pointed at Yen Fong's head. At this time, Yen Fong's whole body was focused on this sword, so she couldn't move. She could only watch Yin Kong's finger getting closer and closer to her. When Yin Kong's finger was only an inch away from Yen Fong's head, he took a deep breath and suddenly exerted force. His finger abruptly thrust forward and pierced into Yen Fang's head. Yin Kong laughed and said, "A little young spirit, how dare you?" But before he could finish his words, he suddenly saw Yen Fang in front of him turn into a pile of ashes and disappear in an instant. Yin Kong was dumbfounded. Just as he reacted, he suddenly felt a pain in his back. In a rage, he backhanded his palm. This palm was so powerful that Yen Fang, who was behind him, suddenly screamed and flew out. She hit the wall and almost collapsed it. Yen Fang's chest was full of blood. At this time she had been hit by another palm. She was 80% dead. She spat out a mouthful of blood and struggled to stand up. Yin Kong's eyes widened and he couldn't believe his eyes. He instantly realized that he had stabbed Yen Fang's real body the first time, but she had instantly used an illusion to make him think that he had stabbed a fake body. Then she had used the fake body to stab him from behind, and her real body had launched a second sneak attack from behind. This kind of trap within a trap within a trap within a trap really shocked Yin Kong. He had been fighting with cultivators of other sects abroad with his Shixiang all year round. He had experienced countless hard and bloody battles, so he had rich experience in fighting. However, most of his opponents were foreigners and most of them were straightforward. They would kill each other as soon as they met, competing to see who was stronger and whose spiritual power was higher. There was no one like Yen Fang who had hidden so many schemes and plots in a life-and-death battle. But what Yin Kong had never expected was that Yen Fang had been hiding here for so many days without moving at all. She had even used her own body as a bait to break Yin Kong's golden body in a trap within a trap within a trap. In fact, she had been waiting for the last trump card. Yen Fang wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and let out a heart-wrenching cry. "Xiao Qiao. Hurry up and do it." Yin Kong had been fooled once and he was unwilling to be fooled a second time. He gritted his teeth and pressed toward Yen Fang, saying angrily, "Even if you shout for help, no one can save you." But at this time Song Yuqiao's body trembled. The scene of Yen Fang saving his life and taking him in as a disciple suddenly appeared in his mind. His master had always called him Xiao Qiao, saying that she liked the name Xiao Qiao. She was the only one in the world who called him that. Although Yen Fang had not taught Song Yuqiao, they were master and disciple, and she had saved his life. Song Yuqiao had felt guilty for abandoning Yen Fang before. At this time, when he heard Yen Fang's cry, he was suddenly enlightened. Suddenly, as if he had been enlightened, he took out the two talismans hidden in his sleeve and stuck them on Yin Kong's arm. Yin Kong was completely defenseless against Song Yuqiao. He was stunned and subconsciously looked at the two talismans on his arm. His face suddenly changed and he let out a fierce roar. "You!" Before he could finish his words, a bolt of heavenly lightning struck down from the sky and struck him squarely. At the same time, his arm also exploded with a loud bang, forcefully blowing his arm into pieces. Uneasy face. Chapter 972. If a fight was about scheming, rather than profound spiritual energy and vigorous jinqi, Yen Fang could at least be ranked in the top 3 in the world. She was originally a proud and arrogant woman that regarded all men in the world as nothing, and she only favored Wang Yuanshan. But in the end, fate had turned her into a sinister schemer that hid in a dark corner all day long, and she was constantly on guard against schemes and plotting against others at all times. Yen Fang was not only strong-minded, but also alert, smart, quick-witted, and resourceful. In terms of cultivation talent, she was definitely not below Wang Yuanshan. Unfortunately, because of love, she had finally given up her body furnace and lurked in the Fox Zen school to carry out a subversive plan. In the end, her cultivation had greatly regressed. Although her cultivation had fallen greatly and was far from Yin Kong of the Shintian sect, who had made great progress in cultivation in a foreign country, it did not mean that her vision and knowledge were inferior to Yin Kong's. When Yen Fang first saw Yin Kong appear in front of her, she knew that she had been targeted by a Jinshin master of the Shintian sect. It would be difficult for her to get away with it. When a young spirit master met a Jinshin master, it was like seeing a natural enemy. Almost no young spirit master would take the initiative to challenge a Jinshin master, because it was courting death. Yin Kong naturally knew this, so he dared to face Yen Fang like this. In the face of absolute power and overwhelming advantage, if it hadn't been for Deng Yu, Deng Jiao, and Li Yundong's sneak attack, no matter how smart Yen Fang was, it would have been impossible for her to come up with a way to deal with Yin Kong in such a short time. Even if she had come up with it, there was no way to implement it. But she had escaped, and Yin Kong had also underestimated Yen Fang's means, giving her enough time to think and make arrangements. Although Yin Kong had done his homework and was ready to return to China, and he had some understanding of the current situation of the Chinese cultivation world, it was absolutely impossible for him to fully understand how terrible Yan Fang, who had been lurking in the Fox Zen school for 9 years, had become. Even if he knew, he relied on the insurmountable barrier of Jinshin and Yang spirit, but he did not take Yan Fang seriously at all. Yan Fang also knew that there were many flaws in her arrangements and traps, but how could there be an absolutely perfect arrangement in the world? How could there be a trap that she was absolutely sure of? Being able to do this in a hurry was already her limit. She was sure that if she escaped, Yin Kong would definitely use some method to keep an eye on her and then use her to find the Rui universe mirror. Therefore she obediently went to the place where the mirror of heaven and earth was hidden. She also deliberately waited there for a long time until Song Yuqiao returned. Yan Fang knew that Yin Kong wouldn't take Song Yuqiao seriously, nor would he guard against her. Her life or death depended entirely on whether this apprentice could save her at a critical moment. It turned out that Yin Kong had underestimated his opponent. Yan Fang had won the bet. The consequence of underestimating the enemy was that Yin Kong's golden body was broken, and one of his arms was blown to pieces. Song Yuqiao had a total of 2 talismans in her hands. One was the 5 Thunder Righteous Talisman, and the other was the 9 Sun Flaming Explosion Talisman. They could burst out extremely terrifying lethality in a very small space. Song Yuqiao had heard her master talk about how to use these 2 talismans, and she had also heard about their power. But after all, she hadn't seen or experienced it with her own eyes. Therefore, when she stuck the 2 talismans on Yin Kong's arms, she only took 2 steps back and didn't run away in time. When the heavenly thunder fell, although it didn't hit her, when the 9 Sun Flaming Explosion Talisman exploded, she was sent flying by the powerful shock wave. She hit the wall hard and fell into the chicken pen in the yard. She passed out without saying a word. Yan Fang was also seriously injured at this time. Her chest and lungs were pierced and blood was flowing wildly. She had only 2 choices at this time. One was to immediately abandon this body tripod and find another one. The other was to immediately treat it. Otherwise she would definitely die. Compared to Yan Fang, Yin Kong's injuries were more serious. At the beginning, his golden body was broken by Yan Fang's talisman paper sword, and Yan Fang's unique yin and yang aura instantly poured into his body. If he had not been struck by the heavenly thunder talisman, he would have been able to expel or even devour the strange aura that had invaded his body in an instant. However, he had been struck by the heavenly thunder talisman. Not only had his arm been blown to smithereens, but his body had also suffered severe injuries. In an instant, Yin Kong's combat power was sharply reduced. He stumbled on the spot and barely supported himself to not fall down. His eyes widened and he looked at Yan Fang with extreme shock and anger. He couldn't believe that all this was true. Yan Fang stared at Yin Kong without showing any weakness. She knew that as long as she showed a little bit of weakness, Yin Kong would immediately pounce on her and kill her. At this time she had no strength to resist. Even a 3-year-old child could stab her to death with a knife. The 2 of them were like 2 ferocious beasts in the forest fighting to the death. Their stomachs were cut open, but they still refused to give in to each other. Whoever gave in first would die first. Yan Fang glared at Yin Kong fiercely. She bet that Yin Kong would underestimate his opponent, and also bet that he would lose his mind and courage to fight when he suddenly suffered such a serious blow when he had an absolute advantage and the chance of winning. He would immediately run away. However, Yan Fang won the bet at the beginning and then, she lost the bet. Yin Kong stared at Yan Fang for a long time, then suddenly raised his head and laughed wildly. There was an indescribable anger in his laughter. At this time he was in the same situation as Yan Fang. He only had 2 choices, immediately treat him or immediately escape with his yang spirit. But his golden body had already been broken. If his yang spirit escaped, by the time he found a suitable body furnace, his Jinshin realm would have already regressed to yang spirit, and his cultivation would definitely be greatly reduced. Yan Fang was also betting that Yin Kong was unwilling to give up his cultivation and would turn around to seek treatment. However, Yin Kong had been fighting with foreign sects and forces abroad for many years. Although he was not as scheming and resourceful as Yan Fang, his mind and decisiveness had long been tempered into steel. He made a prompt decision and immediately released his yang spirit, and his body fell into a pool of blood. Yin Kong grinned grimly at Yan Fang and said, "Good move. Yin Kong's return to China this time has really broadened my horizons." Yin Kong pointed at Yan Fang and said with an angry smile, "Well, Yan Fang, I really underestimated you. I'm afraid you are the first person in history to achieve such a result after the Yang spirit attacked the golden body. Today you must die in peace. Kong raised his hands, waved one hand toward the mirror of heaven and earth, and pointed the other hand at Fang. He said sternly, "Die." Fang sighed in her heart, and the fierce look in her eyes suddenly disappeared. She sighed slowly and closed her eyes in despair. But just as the mirror of heaven and earth was summoned in the air and flew toward Kong, a green light suddenly flashed in the sky and hit the mirror with a clang, sending it flying. This sudden change shocked Kong. He suddenly turned his head in the direction of the green light and asked sternly, "Who is it?" But there was no one around and no one answered him. The ancient alley of Dongwu City was originally remote, and few people came here except for the local residents. It was surrounded by high walls and deep courtyards. It was not a problem to hide an army, let alone a cultivator. Kong turned out to be a Jinshin master. If he had been attacked he would not have been afraid. But at this time his cultivation had been greatly reduced, and he was no longer a Jinshin. How could he still dare to be brave? He was naturally not afraid of Fang alone, but if she had reinforcements, then Kong would really be afraid. Especially when he thought of the master he had met in Mount Longhu, who could shoot a gust of wind with a flick of his finger, which was as powerful as a gun or a cannon. This was really frightening. Kong glanced at Fang. He could kill her with a finger. Then he looked at the mirror of heaven and earth on the ground. He could grab this supreme magic treasure with a wave of his hand. But at this time he did not dare to move. He just stared at the mirror of heaven and earth with hatred for a while. Suddenly, with a shrill cry, his body suddenly turned into countless green lights and fled in all directions. Kong made a prompt decision. He knew that if he continued to be greedy, his body and soul would be destroyed here, so he did not hesitate to escape without a trace. When Fang heard the sound of the green light breaking through the air, she opened her eyes and saw the hope of survival again. She stared at Kong running away and could not help but feel ecstatic. She struggled to walk toward the mirror of heaven and earth. But she was very seriously injured. She had only taken 2 steps when blood gushed out. She spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground with a thud. She remained motionless and passed out. For a moment, in this small courtyard in the ancient city, 2 people were lying in a pool of blood. One was unconscious. The famous supreme magic treasure for cultivation, the mirror of heaven and earth, lay quietly on the ground. The street outside was empty. No one knew that a soul-stirring battle had just taken place here, except for one person. Zhang Tianshi stood on the roof and looked down at the tragic courtyard. He sighed in his heart. Although Fang was extremely talented and could be said to be amazing, he could see that she was narrow-minded, stubborn, and easily went to extremes. So he did not think highly of her. Now it seemed that he was right. A well-known figure in the cultivation world had ended up like this. Zhang Tianshi could not help but shake his head. His gaze once again landed on the Rui mirror of heaven and earth, and he smiled slightly. Just as he was about to wave his hand to take the Dharma treasure from the air, he suddenly saw a few figures running over from a distant alley. These were the local youths. 3 of them were chasing closely behind them, cursing and swearing, calling him a despicable bastard. The other youth was running like a wolf and a mouse. Although he was in a sorry state, he did not want to be outdone. He kept turning his head and cursing back. His voice was loud and his mouth was full of filthy words. He was also cursing like a bastard and a pervert. When Celestial Master Zhang saw the young man who was being chased and beaten, he suddenly exclaimed in surprise and quickly counted with his fingers. Many people saw Taoist priests or fortune-tellers counting people's lives with their fingers and felt that this behavior was very unreliable. But in fact it was just a way to calculate the heavenly stems and earthly branches. In the Book of Changes, the cooperation between the 10 heavenly stems and the 12 earthly branches generally required pen and paper to calculate. However, the ancients did not have the opportunity to use pen and paper when calculating numerology. At this time, the ancients discovered that the human finger was divided into 3 segments, and the index of the hand was exactly 10 fingers, which corresponded to the fixed 10 heavenly stems and the 12 earthly branches. When matched with the 12 earthly branches, one needed to count the earthly branches according to the knuckles. In this way, one could quickly calculate the heavenly stems and earthly branches of the year and month of the year. It could be seen that counting with fingers was actually the highest level of prediction in the Book of Changes. It was the algorithm of the Chimenduanjia. The ancients calculated the heavenly stems, earthly branches, 8 trigrams, 8 gates, 9 palaces, 9 stars, 9 gods and other information in the Chimenduanjia according to the time of the divination or the time of the incident. With a silent calculation in their hearts, the fate of the world was in the palm of their hands. However, this knowledge was too profound. Not everyone could learn it, and not everyone could calculate with 100% accuracy. However, as the leader of the Jingyi school, Zhang Tianshi had been practicing qi deviation and knew that it was impossible for him to reach the golden immortal realm, so he specialized in the Book of Changes, the Chimenduanjia, and other supernatural techniques. He was originally good at these two kinds of magic. After many years of concentrating on studying them, his cultivation quotient was really superb. Although he could not calculate all the mechanisms with his fingers, he could calculate 70 to 80% of them. Zhang Tianshi pinched his fingers for a while. Suddenly his expression changed. He raised his head and looked at the young man in disbelief. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. He clapped his hands and said, "The calamity of the Black Fox and Wisdom King have been solved. The calamity of the demons will fall on this young man. I can go with peace of mind." Zhang Tianshi laughed, turned around and left. He did not look at the Inkuan Rui mirror in the courtyard. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. Only these few youths were getting closer and closer. Chapter 973. Early in the morning, before the pedestrian street of Tianan City became lively, Feng Na arrived at Desangxian. Although the store had not been officially allowed to open, the other employees had dispersed. Some went home, some went back to school, and some went to Mount Longhu with Li Yundong to make a scene. Nuashu provides free ebook downloads of this book. She was different from the others. Cheng Cheng was able to extricate herself from her love for Li Yundong, and the other students were able to look up to Li Yundong with pure admiration and admiration. Cheng Cheng was able to extricate herself from her love for Li Yundong. But she couldn't. From the first time she saw Li Yundong at school like a silly young man, she knew that her fate was entangled with this young man. Maybe she would not become an inseparable part of his life, but like now, staying quietly on the side and working hard to do a good job in the industry he had given her, she felt very happy and satisfied. However, Feng Na felt ashamed to face Li Yundong. Li Yundong had handed over Desangxian to him, but in the end he had been forced to close the door and reorganize by young Master Lu, who had suddenly appeared. And it had been closed for nearly a month. Feng Na came to the door of Desangxian, opened the copper lock on the door and pushed the door open alone. The hollowed and carved door was on the left and right sides. It was painted with brown-black paint and carved with the classical images of China immortals. It was antique. As soon as Feng Na pushed the door open, she saw that the tea house was empty. The tea set on the tea table was placed as usual. It was quiet upstairs and downstairs without the bustling scene of the past. Although Desangxian had opened a branch, people with status still liked to chase after this old shop on the pedestrian street of Tianan City. Therefore, in the past, before the shop opened, the luxury cars of high-ranking officials, nobles, and rich businessmen and celebrities were all parked in the nearby parking lot. As soon as the shop opened, it would immediately be overcrowded. Normally, although this tea house was not bustling with noise and clamor, it was full of distinguished guests, and the scene of people toppling over the building did give people a feeling of blooming flowers blooming like a brocade, and the entrance was as crowded as a marketplace. At this moment the shop was deserted. There was not a single shadow of a person in the shop. Only the tea table was covered with a thin layer of dust. It seemed deserted and lonely. Feng Na sighed and looked back, only to see that the tea house of Zhao across the street had been torn down to pieces. A shed frame had been set up outside and renovation workers were already busy at the door, clanking and clanking. When Desangxian first opened, they had seen the ups and downs of Zhao's tea house in just 1 or 2 hours. But Feng Na did not expect that she would experience such a process. For the first time it was easy for people to adapt to changes in the environment when they were in a flourishing state, but not everyone could withstand the sudden fall from a high place. But Feng Na was a patient girl. When everyone left the three immortals, she came to the three immortals on time every day and silently guarded the tea house. Every day she would carefully clean everything in the tea house, from the tea table to the tea set, from the cobwebs on the roof to the dust on the ground. She cleaned everything until it was spotless. Feng Na carried a basin of water and wiped the dust on the table. Tianan City had developed rapidly in recent years. The number of cars and factories had increased rapidly, and the air quality had dropped seriously. After just one night, the table was covered with dust again. She was tall and graceful. she quietly bent down to wipe the table. Although she was doing rough work under the sunlight outside the door, it reflected a quiet and gentle figure, which was completely different from her usual shrewish personality. Feng Na finished wiping the table, put the rag in the basin to wash, and then picked it up to wring it. But when she was about to bend down, she found that there was a figure in front of her. This figure was standing obliquely beside her. It was very familiar. Feng Na couldn't help looking back and saw a man standing at the door. His back was against the light and his figure was like a silhouette. The morning sun was very bright. Feng Na glanced over. Although she couldn't see his face clearly, she could clearly see the trace of a smile at the corner of the man's mouth. His bright eyes were looking at her with a gentle gaze. At this time a clear voice came from outside the door. Didn't Desanxian already close? Why is it still open today? The voice was clear and moving. After a while, a girl appeared at the door and looked into the shop. Her lips were red, her teeth were white, and her eyes were bright. There was a myriad of charm in her eyes. It was Su Chan. Feng Na stared blankly at Li Yundong and Su Chan at the door, forgetting to say hello for a moment. Li Yundong had mobilized the students of Tianan University to make trouble at Mount Longhu. Su Chan had wanted to go with them, but Li Yundong had forbidden her to go. Now that the storm of Black Fox had just subsided, as an extremely sensitive person, it was really not suitable for Su Chan to show her face in a place like Mount Longhu. Therefore, after being persuaded by Li Yundong, the little girl obediently chose to stay at home in Tianan City. However, when Li Yundong returned from Mount Longhu and began to turn around to clean up the backyard that was on fire, Su Chan couldn't stay any longer. She insisted on coming with Li Yundong no matter what. After staying at home for a while, the little girl gradually recovered from the turmoil and sorrow. Although she had matured a lot and was no longer as lively as a little girl in the past, it was difficult to change her nature. Wherever she went, she revealed a youthful, lovely vitality and tenderness. The silent tea house was originally as quiet as a black and white ink painting, but as soon as the little girl came, the picture immediately had color, vivid and bright. Su Chan noticed that Feng Na was staring at Li Yundong in a daze. Her eyes darted around and she shrank back obediently. Then she poked Li Yundong in the waist with a finger and winked at him. She winked and winked at him. Li Yundong nodded with a smile, stepped forward and said to Feng Na with a smile, "Feng Na, these days, you've worked hard. You've suffered." When Feng Na heard this, her heart suddenly softened, and tears almost burst out of her eyes. She turned around and quickly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with her hand. When she turned back again, her face was full of smiles. "No, I've had a long vacation these days. Is this a paid vacation?" Li Yundong knew that Feng Na cared about her face, so he pretended to be relaxed, but in fact, he didn't know how many times he had cried behind her back and how much pressure he had endured. He reached out and patted Feng Na on the shoulder, sat down and said, "It's okay. I'm back. Don't be afraid. Tell me in detail." Feng Na looked at Li Yundong with a smile that was filled with warmth and strength. It was as if there was nothing in the world that Li Yundong couldn't solve as long as he was by her side. After Feng Na sat down and told Li Yundong what had happened, she looked at him with concern and asked, "The other party seems to have a very powerful background. Do you want to ask Zhou Qin or Mr. Shen for help?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's just a clown. There's no need for the two of them to come forward." Feng Na looked at Li Yundong with some doubt. She knew that Li Yundong was definitely not an ordinary person, but this kind of worldly dispute, if he didn't use the power of the government to settle it, would it? Li Yundong nodded to Feng Na with a smile and said, "Call the others first and ask them to come back and get ready to work. After so many days of rest, it's time to get some exercise. If our shop continues to be idle, I'm afraid that worms will grow." Feng Na pursed her lips and smiled. Seeing that Li Yundong was firm, she felt relieved. She nodded hard and said, "Okay, I'll contact them now. What about you? What are you going to do next?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Of course I'm going to settle accounts with some people. They will spit out what they have eaten from me sooner or later." Feng Na blinked her eyes and said, "Are you talking about Mr. Liu? His background is very strong. Take it easy." Li Yundong laughed and said, "I know. Don't worry." When Feng Na saw Li Yundong sitting at the tea table, she suddenly came to her senses. She stood up and said, "Look at me, I forgot to make tea for you." She turned her head to look upstairs and said, "There have been a few new teas recently, and they taste very good. You." Feng Na turned her head again, only to see that Li Yundong had disappeared. Even Su Chan, who was at the door, had disappeared as if she had never been there. Feng Na was stunned on the spot. After a while she sighed and sat down. Her pretty face was filled with a sense of loss. Li Yundong and Su Chan left Desangxian. Su Chan took Li Yundong's arm and asked with a smile, "Yundong, do you know where Mr. Lu lives?" Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. "I don't know." As he spoke, he closed his eyes, and the Jin Shenyang spirit in his body instantly came out from under his feet. In the blink of an eye, it turned into countless doppelgangers and spread out in all directions. Li Yundong closed his eyes for a short while, then opened them again and said to Su Chan with a smile, "Now I know." At this time, Su Chan's cultivation still had the spiritual power and jinchi of the mystical silver fox. Her cultivation was terrifyingly high, but compared with the mystical silver fox, she lacked the rich fighting experience and superb talent of the mystical silver fox, which had accumulated for thousands of years. Therefore, she didn't expect that Li Yundong would be able to find the existence of the other party through her method of the unity of heaven and man. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong with admiration and said, "Are you going to find him now?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "I've already found him." Su Chan was shocked and widened her eyes. "Ah, weren't you here just now? Did you find him through the Yang spirit doppelganger? What did you say?" "What did he say?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said mysteriously, "I taught him a little lesson." Su Chan chuckled gloatingly and said, "Yes. Baidu entered Nuashu Nets to read the full text online for free. I recommend a beautiful new work, Dog God, which is updated steadily and of good quality. Friends who are in a shortage of books can have a look. Welcome to subscribe." Chapter 974. Early in the morning, when the sun shone into the room through the gap in the curtains, eldest young Master Lu was still sleeping soundly. A girl was sleeping next to him. Her long black hair spread in front of her like a waterfall, and her face could not be seen clearly. Only her breasts were as pink as snow, and her cleavage was amazing. Book Bar 1. In recent years the economy of Tianan City had developed rapidly. 4-star hotels and above had sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, and there were also many 5-star hotels. The beauty sleeping next to eldest young Master Lu was the prey he had picked up in the nightclub yesterday. In order to please the girl, eldest young Master Lu had spent thousands of yuan to rent a presidential suite. The clothes of the two people were scattered all over the room, and there were traces of battle everywhere. When the sun shone on eldest young Master Lu's eyes, he opened them in a daze and subconsciously turned his head to take a look. Seeing that the beauty next to him was still sleeping soundly, eldest young Master Lu laughed and slid his hand under the quilt to eat. Although he had fallen in love with Feng Na, a beautiful and self-reliant girl a few days ago and had caused Desangxian to close down for rectification, he did not stop there. A man like him, who could not live without women, naturally had a lot of women around him. Eldest young Master Lu lifted the girl's hair and revealed a beautiful face. The shape and appearance of her face were very similar to Feng Na's, but there was a lot more wind and dust. Even after a night's sleep, there was still a thick layer of makeup and thick eyeliner on her face, unlike Feng Na, who had a pure beauty like a lotus flower in clear water and a natural carving. For men, especially for eldest young Master Lu, who could attract many beautiful women with a crook of his finger, such a girl had a fatal attraction to him. What could not be got was the best. This truth was universal throughout the ages. Eldest young Master Lu could not help thinking of the round-faced girl again. He could not help feeling a little annoyed and withdrew his hand under the quilt. He did not expect that Feng Na would be so strong and stubborn that she would not give in even when she was suppressed like this. Moreover, what surprised the eldest young Master Lu the most was that he had been looking for trouble with the Desangxian, but they had never responded. This was the most unexpected thing for him. In his opinion, no matter how weak his opponent was, he would at least be angry or protest. If it was a stronger opponent, he might even directly counterattack like a thunderstorm. However, his combination of punches seemed to have hit cotton, and there was no movement at all. It was as if a person had roared at the heavens for a while, but the heavens remained silent and gloomy. This made eldest young Master Lu very uneasy. Such a silent opponent was the most difficult to deal with, because the eldest young Master Lu could not figure out the opponent's details and thoughts at all. The reason why the sea was awe-inspiring was that it remained calm even when a storm was about to come. The reason why the sky was awe-inspiring was that it remained silent even when a storm was about to come. The eldest young Master Lu had grown up in a family of officials, and his sense of danger was far superior to that of ordinary people. He faintly felt that a kind of danger was coming to him. Did he find the wrong person to fight with such an opponent? because he knew that the target he chose was definitely not an ordinary person. If an ordinary person was tormented by him like this and became silent, then it was because they were afraid of his power. Who knows, he might pounce on them and bite them again. But who was the target he chose? The opening of a tea house could alarm the number one figure of the provincial party committee. If such a person knew that he had been offended, how could he not do anything? In the eyes of the eldest young Master Lu, this was absolutely unimaginable. Tai Chi Master Li Yashuan once held a banquet. A stranger came up to shake hands with her because of her fame. Li Yashuan shook hands politely, but she did not expect that the other party had malice. At the moment of shaking hands, his fingers forcefully broke Li Yashuan's thumb. If it had been another person who made such a sneak attack, he would have been furious on the spot, and the banquet would have become a place of blood. But Li Yashuan acted as if nothing had happened. She sat down as usual, said nothing during the banquet, and ate as usual. The person who made the sneak attack was terrified. The longer he stayed, the more frightened he became. When the banquet was over, the more he went back and thought about it, the more frightened he became. Finally, he could not bear the torture and went to apologize in person. But if the person he had attacked was a nameless pawn, he would not have been so panicked and restless, and would not have been sleepless all night. But who was Li Yashuan? Li Yashuan was the outstanding disciple of Taiji guru Yang Qingfu. In his later years, Yang Qingfu was famous. Countless masters came to challenge him, but Li Yashuan was the one who defeated them all. And Yang Qingfu was the great-grandson of Yang Luqian, who was once invincible in Beijing. People gave him the nickname Invincible Yang. When he was young, he loved to play. Before his father Yang Jianho died, he said to him with tears, "Your elder brother followed uncle to practice martial arts day and night, very hard, but you enjoy life and play. Now you are teaching disciples. If one day a master came to challenge you and you lost, how could you live up to the reputation of your ancestor Yang Wudi?" Yang Qingfu was shocked. At the age of 34, he practiced martial arts hard. 6 years later, he succeeded and left the mountain. In 1923, he openly accepted disciples in Beijing. At this time, there were many masters in Beijing. Hearing that Invincible Yang's great-grandson was accepting disciples, the world was shocked. Countless masters gathered in Beijing to challenge Yang Qingfu. Yang Qingfu did not refuse anyone who came to challenge him. He had defeated countless people, and among them, there were only two who had come to challenge him and ended in a draw. One was that armed Saint Zhang Su who practiced the penetrating fist, and the other was the world-renowned martial Saint Sun Lutang, who was known to be invincible in the world. After the competition between Yang Qingfu, Zhang Su and Sun Lutang, the three of them became sworn brothers. It could be seen that his martial arts were excellent and had reached the peak. As his disciple, Li Yashuan's position in Kung Fu was the same as Zhou Qin's. There was no doubt about her Kung Fu. A great master like him was offended like this. If he retaliated later, the consequences would be terrible, which was really unimaginable. Since ancient times, one could be a thief for 1,000 days, but there was no such thing as guarding against thieves for 1,000 days. It was also for this reason that the attacker could not bear such terrible suffering and torture, so he took the initiative to apologize and ask for forgiveness. Eldest young Master Lu was now very much like the martial arts master who attacked Li Yashuan. He originally thought that after the sneak attack he could provoke the other party to fight back in anger, and he would have a way to deal with it no matter what. But the other party did not respond, so all his efforts fell into vain. The more eldest young Master Lu waited, the more flustered and uneasy he became. But now he was in a difficult position. If he took the initiative to let De Sangxian go, he would become a laughingstock in the circle in the future. This was something that the young and vigorous eldest young Master Lu could not accept. But if he continued to wait like this, when would it end? The more eldest young Master Lu thought about it, the more upset he became. He reached out to touch the cigarette on the table, but when his hand was halfway there, suddenly there was a person in front of him, standing in front of the bed and looking at him. The man stood by the windowsill. He was not very tall, but he gave people a kind of majesty that could not be looked at directly. He was against the light, and the sun shone on him, revealing a faint golden light, like a god or a Buddha. Eldest young Master Lu did not see anyone in front of him a second ago, but in the next second, there was one more person out of thin air. This was not a trivial matter. The eldest young Master Lu was so shocked that all the pores on his body exploded, and all the hair on his body stood up. All men had morning erections in the morning, and eldest young Master Lu was no exception. When he woke up, he was like a pillar holding up the sky. But at this moment he was frightened and the iron pillar fell down in an instant. The middle of his crotch was wet and hot in an instant. It was shameful and smelly, and he immediately urinated and defecated. Traditional Chinese medicine said that fear would hurt the kidney and shock would hurt the gallbladder. It was because at the moment of fear, all the blood in the body would gather to the middle dantian of the heart in an instant. At this time, the heart would beat faster, and the load on the heart would suddenly increase by several times or even more than 10 times, causing the pressure on the heart to suddenly increase. When some people were extremely shocked, their hands and feet were cold because the blood in their limbs had been drawn to the heart, causing their hands and feet to be cold. Some people were scared to death because their hearts could not bear the rapid blood flow and the instantaneous expansion of the ventricles and atriums, leading to death. When people were frightened, they would urinate and defecate because, according to the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine, the kidney was the second bowel. In the chapter of the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine, Plain Questions, it was also said that fear leads to the lowering of qi. The kidney was the source of vitality, and the function of the kidney was to consolidate. Some people's essence, qi and spirit were extremely strong, and their qi was restrained and full of vitality. This was because their kidney qi was sufficient, and their qi was restrained and consolidated. But once the kidney qi was not solid, the qi would sink, and the kidney's consolidation function would be reduced. Once the consolidation function was reduced, it would lead to urinary incontinence. At this time, eldest young Master Lu was so frightened that he did not notice that he had urinated. He just looked at the man who had suddenly appeared in front of him in horror and fear, shivering all over. This man was naturally Li Yundong's yang spirit doppelganger. He stood at the head of eldest young Master Lu's bed and stared at him faintly. Although his eyes were not sharp, they were like Buddha in the clouds looking down at ants on the ground. The pressure was so strong that it was suffocating. Li Yundong had originally wanted to teach this guy who had dared to offend him a lesson, but when he appeared, he was so scared that he had urinated and defecated. Moreover, judging from the lack of qi between his eyebrows, it was a question whether he could still stand up normally like a man in the future. He immediately lost interest in teaching a bug lying in the filth. Li Yundong stared at eldest young Master Lu and only said lightly, "You closed the door of Desanxian, didn't you?" This sentence was like a heavy iron hammer, smashing on eldest young Master Lu's heart. It startled him so much that a crazy voice was screaming in the depths of his mind, "Here it comes. Here it comes indeed. I'm going to die, I'm going to die." At this time, eldest young Master Lu had no time to think about who the other party was and what kind of shintong he had that could appear in front of him in an instant. At this time, all his wits had completely degenerated, leaving only the instinct of a weak animal to tremble in fear of a powerful creature. At this time, eldest young Master Lu thought that he was going to die. Since the other party could appear in his room without anyone noticing, he naturally had the means to kill him without anyone noticing. This kind of fear of death deeply enveloped eldest young Master Lu's body and soul, making him lose almost all his functions. He couldn't move, shout, breathe or even move his eyeballs even if he wanted to. However, Li Yundong just took a deep look at him, and a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was hard to tell whether it was mockery, contempt or something else, but his smile was deeply imprinted in the mind of the eldest young Master Lu like a brand, making him receive a clear message in an instant. "You are just a low-level creature. I can kill you as easily as pinching a bug to death." At this moment, eldest young Master Lu suddenly regained control of his body. He found that he could move again. He shivered all over and was about to beg for mercy, but he suddenly found that Li Yundong was no longer in front of him. He had disappeared as if he had never been there. Eldest young Master Lu was covered in cold sweat on the bed, unable to come to his senses for a long time. The beauty beside him was still unconscious. Only his thighs and the bed were dirty and the stench was strong. Chapter 975. Li Yunyang was shocked by the bedside of Donggu Sang. Young Master Lu went to visit Desanxian that day and took the initiative to beg Feng Na for mercy and admit his mistake. The next day Desanxian reopened for business. Soon Carrot, please remember our website. After such a disturbance, if it had been another shop or enterprise, it would have been able to kill the shop or enterprise in nearly a month. But Desanxian was different. If Desanxian was an ordinary tea house, it had created a wave of cultural craze, but it had been cut off for nearly a month. For a new industry it was 80% likely to collapse. Even if it did not collapse, it would suffer a fatal blow, and it was very likely that it would not be able to recover. However, Desangxian did not rely on popularity and customer volume to operate. What could really support this industry was actually the group of people in Desangxian who were qualified to get Earth Immortal cards, or Celestial Immortal cards. Although the number of human Immortal cards was far more than that of Earth Immortal cards and Celestial Immortal cards, and at the same time, it also brought great popularity to Desangxian. However, in fact, they were the most cultured and passionate ones. They were also the most capricious ones. Unlike the group of people who had Earth Immortal cards or Celestial Immortal cards, what they drank was the real immortal tea of Desangxian. What they drank was just tea with a little immortal qi. Although it had the effect of nourishing the body and calming the mind, it was not enough to bring them some kind of great physical or psychological change. Even if some people did, after nearly a month, it was enough to make them forget about Desangxian. The faster a thing rose, if it suddenly encountered setbacks and blows, the faster it would decline. It was the same in ancient times and modern times. The Desangxian had been closed for nearly a month. At first, a large number of elegant guests kept asking about when the Desangxian would open. But slowly their enthusiasm faded, and they gradually forgot about the tea house which had once been a mess. Although some high-ranking officials and nobles with Earth Immortal cards and Celestial Immortal cards had the ability and energy to settle these things, the water in China's officialdom was too deep. Almost their Qin Wan Kai, who could help Desangxian the most, went abroad to negotiate, while Zhou Qin's old man was far away in another province. Even if he knew about this matter, he would not easily intervene. Although eldest young Master Lu's strength was as small as an ant to him, his father stood behind him. Although his father's official position was far lower than Zhou Kechang's, eldest young Master Lu's father would certainly have someone above him. The officialdom of China was complicated. Sometimes, the power of a small county party secretary could even affect the central government. This was the complicated officialdom of China. When many people learned that Desangxian had offended a certain child and closed the shop, they became vigilant and watched from a distance. It was impossible for them to fall into an unpredictable realm for the sake of a cup of tea. Chinese people were often like this. Their talent for seeking benefits and avoiding harm was far superior to other races in the world. As soon as they heard that Desangxian had offended someone, they hid far away and waited to see what would happen. When they saw that Desangxian had reopened, they came out again with great enthusiasm. However, compared with those ordinary tea guests who would forget about it after a while, this group of people were still hardcore. The reason was very simple, because what they drank was the immortal tea that could really improve one's physique and health. The so-called tasting the marrow referred to this group of people. Usually they were used to drinking the tea of Desangxian, and they didn't feel anything during the spring breeze and drizzle. But when they stopped, their lives were still extravagant, and their health suddenly deteriorated from good to bad. The contrast was immediately very obvious, and this group of people could only wait anxiously. As soon as Desangxian reopened, this group of people immediately spread the news. Within an hour, the entrance of Desangxian was once again blocked by all kinds of high-end cars. Those who used to be very polite to Feng Na had hardly shown up a month ago. When they appeared again at this time, some of them were thick-skinned and didn't mention a word about the past, as if they didn't know that Desangxian had closed for a month. Some of them were thin-skinned and said that they were on a business trip or abroad, so they didn't know that Desangxian was in such a situation. They patted their chests and promised that if such a situation happened again in the future, they would do their best to help. However, Feng Na knew that if these people were reliable, even a pig could climb a tree. In this world, the most reliable person was Li Yundong. In the Desangxian tea house, Feng Na looked at the Desangxian tea house, which had become full of friends again. She felt extremely emotional in her heart. From bustling to deserted, from bustling to lonely, and then from deserted to crowded. It was just one night. The ups and downs of life and the unpredictability of things in the world were all revealed. But what made Feng Na even more emotional was that after Li Yundong had solved the problem at hand, she didn't know where he had gone. It was really hard to see the tail of a dragon. She didn't know when they would meet again. At this time, an unexpected guest came to Li Yundong's house, which surprised him very much. "Mr. Li, please consider my proposal carefully. Please." Tanaka Misa was wearing a beautiful white cherry blossom kimono. She was kneeling in the living room of Li Yundong's house. Her body was deeply bent down, and there was a red pillow tied to the bag on her back. The Japanese kimono had strict requirements. The pillow was used to distinguish whether a woman was married or not. The pillow behind a married woman was a pillow, and the pillow behind an unmarried woman was a bow. The butterfly behind Tanaka Misa matched the kimono on her body very well. The clothes were pink cherry blossoms on a white background, and the bow on the pillow was white cherry blossoms on a pink background. It looked graceful, dignified, and elegant. The little foxes of the Fox Zen school looked at the Japanese girl in front of them curiously. Although they had seen Tachibana Wakako in a kimono before, she was too young to wear the real beauty of the kimono. Tanaka Misa, on the other hand, was an old leftover woman in the upper class of Japan. She had a graceful figure and a beautiful appearance. Wearing this kimono she looked gorgeous, quiet, and dignified. Li Yundong sat cross-legged on the floor and looked at Tanaka Misa thoughtfully. He hadn't expected that at this time, a Japanese conglomerate would take the initiative to cooperate with him and discuss the matter of driving the Desanxian to Japan. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about this before, but after the incident with the mystical silver fox, Li Yundong had given up this idea. First, he hadn't dealt with the domestic affairs well, so he had no time to care about them for the time being. Second, there had been a fierce battle between gods and Buddhas on Mount Tianlong. Countless people in the Japanese cultivation world had died or been injured, and almost all of them had been directly or indirectly related to him. If he hadn't insisted on protecting Su Chan, he was afraid that the Japanese cultivation world wouldn't have suffered so many casualties. Thinking of this, Li Yundong naturally didn't think that the Japanese cultivation world would by his account. They didn't come to take revenge on him, which was already their greatest patience. At the same time he had given them a great shock. Otherwise, with the national character of the Japanese, once they found that he was stronger than Li Yundong, they would immediately kill him without any hesitation. But at this time, Tanaka Misa had come to Li Yundong on behalf of the Tanaka conglomerate under the Mitsui group. This was thought-provoking. What are these Japanese up to? Li Yundong couldn't help but feel a little confused. Although he was invincible in fighting when it came to economic things, he was in a different profession. No matter how smart he was, he couldn't figure out what the other party wanted to do. Although he was considered to have a certain background in China and no one would make life difficult for him, it was a different story once he left the country. In the past, he could still rely on his reputation as the reincarnated wisdom king to gain popularity in Japan and enjoy some incense money. However, since the Japanese cultivation groups had come to China several times and returned bleeding several times, especially after the tragic battle at the foot of Mount Tianlong, the Japanese cultivation world had suffered indescribable damage. After returning to China, almost every family was holding a funeral, and all the sects were holding funerals. The entire Japanese cultivation world was crying loudly, and mourning was everywhere. The Japanese should want to tear him to pieces. In such a situation, if he still opened the shop in Japan, if it wasn't asking for trouble and seeking his own death, then what was it? However, if he completely gave up this matter, Li Yundong felt that it was a pity for the Japanese market. After all, although the tea ceremony originated in China, even Li Yundong, a patriot of the Chinese nation, had to admit that after the tea ceremony went east to Japan, it had been greatly promoted. It could even be said that the tea ceremony was far more popular and valued in Japan than in China. In China, most of the time, tea was just a business, just a commodity under the guise of art. But in Japan, tea was art, culture, and sacred Tao. If he wanted to take root in the world, he had to first conquer the Japanese market. Otherwise, it would be empty talk all over the world. Only by conquering the Japanese market and making the Japanese completely recognize the tea shop of Desanxian would he be successful in the future. It would be much simpler and easier. Therefore, Li Yundong had thought that it was hopeless to enter Japan, but Tanaka Misa's sudden return made him feel hopeful. Business was far more complicated than cultivation. Cultivation was a matter of a single person. A single person could rely on their own incomparably powerful strength to turn the tide and hold up the sky single-handedly. However, in business, there had never been a single person who could charge and break through enemy lines to settle everything. Any success in business was definitely a team victory. No matter how powerful Li Yundong was, it was impossible for him to go to Japan alone to kill people and rob tens of billions of yuan. If he did that, he would immediately become the second big devil and be attacked by the world. Even God would not tolerate him. It was a matter of course to abide by the rules of one's profession. Therefore, Li Yundong wanted to bring Desanxian to Japan. This was very likely to be an opportunity, but it was also very likely that the other party wanted to pull him into a completely strange field, a completely strange world, and set up a trap. But, should he avoid this trap or should he face it head-on, decisively jump into it, and use his great wisdom and strategy to break out of it? Li Yunyang stared at Tanaka Misa, who was crawling in front of him, and fell into deep thought. What are you doing? What are you doing? VBSP, what are you doing? Chapter 975 Looking East to Fusang. Chapter 976. While Li Yundong was in a dilemma, the Japanese cultivation world was also in a deep dilemma. The Battle of Mount Koya made the Japanese cultivation world know a young man from the Chinese cultivation world. The Battle of Nazuno made the Japanese cultivation world realize the horror of Li Yundong as the top master in the Chinese cultivation world, and completely made Li Yundong famous. There were tens of millions of Buddhists in Japan, and many of them believed in the immovable wisdom king. It could be said that there were good believers. This situation was just like when Wu Qingyuan went east to Japan at the age of 14. This genius national player, who was known as the pinnacle of Go, the pinnacle of Tao, became a Japanese citizen in order to compete with the world's top Go players in Japan at that time. He rose to prominence at the time when China and Japan were at loggerheads. Japan was very hostile to this Chinese Go player and did not recognize his Japanese nationality at all. Wu Qingyuan played chess on the tip of the knife all day long. As long as he lost once in 10 battles, he would immediately be smashed to pieces. However, he did not lose. Not only did he not lose, but in the past 20 years, he had defeated all the 7 strongest players in Japan in 10 consecutive battles. Between 1939 and 1956, the Japanese Go world only did a few things: revoke Wu Qingyuan's nationality and disqualify him from participating in the Heninjo Games, the highest level of Go competition in Japan. Then they selected their strongest Go players through various tournaments and sent them to Wu Qingyuan for him to slap to death. Then they selected a new one for him to slap to death. 20 years later, the Japanese Go world found that this was not a good way. 7 national players were killed in a row in the Go world. They couldn't stand it anymore. No one could stop Wu Qingyuan, so they found a member of the club and knocked him away at the gate of a community. From then on, the Japanese Go world was no longer ravaged by Wu Qingyuan. However, a few years later, especially in the middle and late 1970s, China's Go rose rapidly. Nie Weiping, the chess sage, appeared out of nowhere and defeated 6 top Japanese Go players in a row, shattering the Japanese dream of being the best in the world. At this time, the Japanese people's self-esteem was seriously damaged. They found that they had been ahead of the world for decades or even hundreds of years, but they were suddenly overtaken by the Chinese. They wanted to find someone to defeat Nie Weiping, but they couldn't find anyone. At this time they found a good target: Wu Qingyuan. Therefore they began to recognize everything about Wu Qingyuan, granting him citizenship and various honorary titles. They also boasted shamelessly that the world's #1 chess saint, Wu Qingyuan, was from Japan. They also trumpeted that Wu Qingyuan was the strongest in the world and that Nie Weiping was not even worthy of carrying his shoes when compared to him. The clowns of the island countries had been playing this kind of trick for thousands of years. As the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king, although things were different, the truth was almost exactly the same as that of Wu Qingyuan. When the Japanese found that Masako Tachibana, the strongest in their civil war, could not withstand a single blow from Li Yundong, and when they found that their mystical silver fox with a pale face was finally defeated by Li Yundong, they had already realized that the whole Japanese cultivation world could not stop this powerful and frightening young man. But when they found that Li Yundong was actually the reincarnation of Wisdom King, the Japanese couldn't help but get excited again. It turned out that such a powerful master was also the reincarnation of the Lord God that Japan believed in. What? The immovable Wisdom King is a god from China's Taming, not from Japan? Fuck, the people of China almost exterminated Taming more than 1,000 years ago. If it weren't for Japan, how could there be a Taming faction in the world? Moreover, the people of China don't believe in religion now. In China, the number of people who believe in the immovable Wisdom King is less than 1% of the people of Japan. If the immovable Wisdom King is not the god of Japan, which country is he from? In this way the Japanese people felt much more comfortable. No wonder His Highness Li Yundong was so powerful. It turned out that he was the reincarnation of the god of our Empire of Japan. It was as if after being beaten up, he hypnotized himself and comforted himself that the one who taught him a lesson was his senior. Japan paid attention to the order of merit and virtue. Losing to a senior was not a shameful thing. It was natural and justified. But the biggest difference between Li Yundong and Wu Qingyuan was that Wu Qingyuan was a genius in chess and an idiot in other aspects. If he didn't play chess he would be a good for nothing. He had no value in the world at all. All the value in his life lay in playing chess. Therefore, after the Japanese recognized all his honors and status, he did not refuse or refute them. He was still not surprised or happy. He still played chess honestly and studied chess skills. But Li Yundong was different. Although he was a great genius in cultivation, he was not like Wu Qingyuan, who was nothing without go. Li Yundong was a sentimental person. At the beginning he had cultivated for Su Chan and longed to become stronger. Therefore he could do all kinds of horrible things for Su Chan. Therefore when the Japanese added Wu Qingyuan's honorary status, Wu Qingyuan accepted it. But when the Japanese wanted to add all kinds of honorary status to Li Yundong, they happened to meet the mystical silver fox possessing Su Chan's body. As a result, the Japanese cultivation world was completely tragic. Because of Li Yundong, this group of Japanese people was severely taught a lesson by the mystical silver fox. When they returned to Japan to hold a funeral, all the sects in the Japanese cultivation world were holding funerals. There was no sect that didn't do funerals at all. Even Ise Shinto, who had suffered the least damage, had no choice but to do something unnecessary due to the pressure. Both Xinguang and Chuyun pretended to cry in front of all the gods. However, they pretended to cry, but many sects in the Japanese cultivation world were really crying. Their hatred for Li Yundong exploded in an instant, almost reaching the critical point. The soul of the mystical silver fox had been completely scattered. It was impossible for them to take revenge on the mystical silver fox. Even if they wanted to find trouble, they could only fall on Su Chan's head. But what was the difference between falling on Su Chan's head and falling on Li Yundong's head? The Japanese cultivation world could find out clearly that many of those who had offended Li Yundong were living a good life, but because of Su Chan they had annoyed Li Yundong. Their bodies and souls had been destroyed and they were no longer in the world. Looking for trouble with Su Chan? *CK Everyone calm down. The Japanese cultivation world had a deep hatred for China and anti-Chinese soil. Previously, because of Li Yundong's extremely strong power, they had no choice but to yield. Fortunately, the pro-China party could find such a reason as the reincarnation of Wisdom King to force them to yield. But now, the reincarnation of Wisdom King advocated by the pro-China party had turned around and beaten them up. In the past they could say that the senior had beaten them up and they could still smile, but this time they couldn't say that their father had beaten them up, could they? No matter how shameless a person was, he wouldn't be so shameless, would he? Therefore this time the Japanese could no longer find any reason to flatter Li Yundong. The anti-Chinese party and the anti-Chinese party instantly gained the upper hand. If it weren't for the fact that they had been badly injured and they really felt that they couldn't beat Li Yundong, they would have immediately sent out all their elites and rushed to China to take revenge. At this time, in the Wishing Temple, the headquarters of the Pure Land True sect in the Japanese cultivation world, a young monk was holding an old monk and crying loudly. In the Imperial Shadow Hall with white walls and gray tiles, the young monk looked extremely young. He was only about 15 or 16 years old. He had delicate features and a good foundation. The old monk in front of him was extremely old, and his two snow-white eyebrows almost reached his ears. The young monk hugged the old monk and cried, "Your Highness, why is this happening? Didn't Master say that there was no danger in this trip? Why did he leave me without saying a word?" This old monk was called Iki Rain-Ti, a leading figure in the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land True sect. She was one of the 8 yellow-robed monks of the Pure Land True sect. Her cultivation and experience were extremely high. Iki Rain-Ti patted the young monk on the shoulder and sighed, saying, "Dongming was Su, that's because he mistakenly trusted an untrustworthy person. If it weren't for my special identity, I'm afraid I would have ended up the same as him." The young monk called Dongming Wasu raised his head, revealing a face with delicate features, red lips and white teeth. If it weren't for the fact that his voice was clearly that of a man, he would have looked like a girl. Dongming Wasu knew that the old monk in front of him was not an ordinary person. He was one of the members of the Japanese royal family. In the past, the Japanese royal family fought for power and profit. Although the losers were not killed, they often chose to shave their hair and become a monk. There was no surname in the Japanese royal family. Before Iki Rain-Ti became a monk, she had no surname or name. She only had the title of the royal family. After becoming a monk, everything was empty. Naturally, her previous name had to be changed. Therefore, after Iki Rain-Ti failed in the struggle, she shaved her hair and became a monk, giving herself such a name. He was born in a noble family and had high talent. After decades of cultivation, he had reached an unpredictable realm. His cultivation was even higher than that of the suzerain of the Pure Land True sect. This time, many masters of the Pure Land True sect followed the suzerain to Shina. As the leader of the Imperial Shadow Hall, he was supposed to follow them. However, although Iki Rain-Ti had left the royal family, her previous identity was there. Therefore, his special identity allowed him to escape and he did not follow the main force to China. After the team of the Pure Land True sect returned, nearly half of its members had been reduced, and the body and soul of the suzerain had also been destroyed. Even his body had been put together and brought back. This caused an uproar in the temple. Although the suzerain of the Pure Land True sect had profound spiritual power and was known as a godlike figure in the sect, when he arrived at China, he was vulnerable in front of the mystical silver fox, let alone Li Yunyang, who had defeated all the gods and Buddhas by himself. The Pure Land True sect was shocked and angry, and Iki Rainti was even more regretful. If she had known this would happen, she would have stopped the suzerain. Higashi Washo was the beloved disciple of the Pure Land True sect's suzerain, Ito Saji. He was considered one of the future leaders of the Japanese cultivation world. Ito Saji had the intention of protecting Higashi Washo, so he did not let him follow him to China. He was afraid that something would happen to him and destroy the future of the Pure Land True sect. However, he did not expect that although his idea had protected Higashi Washo, he had lost himself. Higashi Washo had been a monk since he was a child. When he was 5 years old he could not speak. When his mother carried him to burn incense and entered the Buddhist temple, she accidentally met Ito Saji preaching. At that time Higashi Washo pointed to Ito Saji and began to speak. He was talking about Buddhist scriptures, and there were clouds and rosy clouds above his head. When Ito Saji saw this, he was shocked and accepted Higashi Washo as his disciple on the spot. For more than 10 years he had been teaching him carefully behind closed doors. They had a close relationship and were like father and son. Higashi Washo's eyes were red and he cried and shouted, "Your Highness, why don't you let me go to China to avenge my master? A teacher for a day is a father for a lifetime. Do I have to swallow the hatred of my father's death?" Unlike the Izumo, Divine Light and other pro-China sects of the Ise Shinto, Iki Rainti was an authentic anti-China sect. Although her name was elegant, she was a person who advocated violence. That was why there were so many human weapons in the Imperial Shadow Hall. Iki Rainti had always disapproved of the pro-China theories of Kaisai Hikaryuni and the others. Her method had always been simple, which was to conquer, and conquer again. Even if she couldn't conquer them now, she would hide carefully and wait for an opportunity to conquer them in the future. Iki Rainti stared at Higashi Washo, her old face revealing an indescribable murderous intent. She said slowly, "Because you are still too weak and your opponent is too strong. Please remember your opponent's name. He will accompany you for a lifetime." Higashi Washo's handsome face looked ferocious. "Is it the Devil King called Li Yundong? I must defeat him in the future." Iki Rainti shook her head slowly and said, "No, your real enemy isn't called Li Yundong." Higashi Washo leaned forward and widened his eyes. He said murderously, "Then what is he called?" Iki Rainti said word by word, "Zhonghua, Oki Rainti." Chapter 977. Eheim Raintia's words shocked Higashi Washo. He asked in confusion, "Your Highness, I don't understand what you mean." Eheim Rainti smiled and said, "Washo, do you think Li Yundong is your most terrifying enemy? No, you're wrong." Higashi Washo looked at Eheim Rainti in confusion. He put his hands on his knees and asked respectfully, "Your Highness, please explain." Eheim Rainti said slowly, "China is vast and resourceful, dozens of times more than Japan. Maybe you can defeat Li Yundong today, but tomorrow you will find that Li Yunan, Li Yunxi and Li Yunbei will appear. They will emerge one after another and they will eventually defeat you." Eheim Raintia's eyes suddenly became distant and full of vicissitudes. She said with emotion, "Wasn't it like this in the Sacred War of East Asia decades ago? We have occupied most of the land of China and enslaved nearly half of its population, but we still failed in the end." Eheim Rainti looked at Higashi Washo with fanatical eyes and said, "Li Yundong is only a part of China. He is now the hegemon of the world, but it won't last long. According to my understanding of the Chinese cultivation world, there is a very strict boundary between heaven and the human world. Anyone who has reached Li Yundong's level will not survive in the human world for long." Eheim Rainti, the fanatical remnant of war, patted Higashi Washo's shoulder and said, "When you grow up, maybe he will no longer be in the human world." Eheim Rainti said angrily, "Then there is no way to take revenge for such a great enmity, right?" Eheim Rainti pointed to the west and said, "Yes, Li Yundong will leave the human world sooner or later, but China will not. This enemy of thousands of years will always stand beside us, waiting for us to conquer it. That's why China is your greatest enemy for life. Please remember this, Wuxia. Dongming Wuxia nodded his head as if he understood. He bit his lips so hard that the muscles on his cheeks bulged like steel bars. He did not even notice that the corner of his mouth had cracked. She smiled and said, "Don't be discouraged. Before that, we still have a chance to defeat Li Yundong, but not in cultivation. He has reached the peak of cultivation and we can't catch up with him. Fighting with him is like hitting a stone with an egg. Wise people won't do it." Dongming Wuxia asked doubtfully, "Is there any other way?" Rain-Tea Misaki smiled and said, "Tea ceremony?" Dongming Wuxia was stunned. "Tea ceremony?" Rain-Tea nodded and said, "That's right. You've been cultivating in the mountains all year round and don't know anything about the world, so you don't know about Li Yundong. This person is very ambitious. He wants to use the tea ceremony to spread Chinese culture to the world again, but he didn't expect that the peak of the world's tea ceremony is in Japan. If he wants to spread the tea ceremony to the world, our Yamato tea ceremony is the peak that he can never avoid." Although Dongming Wuxia did not care about the world all year round and focused on cultivation, he still knew these traditional cultures and past history very well. He knew that Chinese culture had been severely damaged in the past 100 years, and the tea ceremony was no exception. Although the tea ceremony originated in China, it was carried forward by Lu Yu, the god of tea in the Tang dynasty, and then spread to Japan. It was inherited by the Japanese tea sage Senrikyu, who carried forward and finally established Japan's own tea ceremony. Later, the Japanese tea ceremony flourished and reached a very high level. Until the 1980s, many schools of Japanese tea ceremony visited China. Among them, Senrikyu's 15th-generation descendant, Senrikyu, came to China with a group to meet President Jiang and realize the reciprocal support of Chinese tea culture. In the eyes of the Japanese, the Chinese tea ceremony had declined to the extreme, and there was even no real tea ceremony in China. The most authentic tea ceremony in the world only existed in Japan. Therefore, if Li Yundong came to Japan to fight, the entire Japanese cultivation world would have to raise their hands and surrender. But if he came to Japan to fight, the Japanese would not agree. Instead of using his strengths, he wanted to use his weaknesses. Wasn't this giving up his strengths for his weaknesses and humiliating himself? Higashi Wuxia couldn't believe his ears. He asked in great astonishment, "Will Li Yundong really come to Japan to fight tea?" Rain-Tea Misaki laughed and said, "Now the Tanaka conglomerate has gone to China to beg Li Yundong to go to Japan to establish the foundation of the Desanxian. Based on my understanding of him, he has always liked to face difficulties and go against heaven, so he will definitely agree. If he wants to make a name for the Desanxian in Japan and establish his position, he must participate in the tea competition." Rain-Tea Misaki smiled proudly and said, "Wuxia, let's open our eyes and see if the invincible Li Mingwang will fall this time." Higashi Wuxia nodded doubtfully. He still couldn't believe that Li Yundong would give up his strengths for his weaknesses and come to Japan to fight tea with them. But what he didn't expect was that Li Yundong would agree. "I promise you," Li Yundong said solemnly to Tanaka Misa in front of him. Tanaka Misa, who was lying on the ground, raised her head in surprise as if she couldn't believe her ears. Tanaka Misa looked at Li Yundong in surprise and then lay back down. Her thoughts were not as complicated as Rain-Tea Misa and the chaebol behind her. The little girl's thoughts were very simple. Finally, she could see the abilities of this great hero in her own country. Japanese women were very strange. They had a strong national character and naturally worshipped the strong. Once they identified a person or thing, they could do things that most women in the world couldn't do. Jiang Zuomei, the wife of Jiang Bailey, who was known as the flower of the famous generals in the Republic of China, used to be the head nurse of the Japanese legation in China. Once, when she was taking care of Jiang Bailey, she fell deeply in love with him. Later, she abandoned her family, changed her name, and even abandoned her nationality. She followed Jiang Bailey until her death. During the anti-Japanese war, she followed Jiang Bailey to fight against the Japanese. She cut off all contact with her relatives in Japan and didn't teach her children to speak Japanese. After Jiang Bailey died, she was a widow for the rest of her life. Guomorua, Gu Hongming, Li Shadong, and Lu Sun had Japanese women who loved them deeply, and all of them were loyal to them until their deaths. Compared to men, women were born to treat things that they were interested in or liked to worship. Emotions, patriotism, family values, traditional ethics, and so on could all be discussed, but Japanese women did it in the purest way. In particular, Tanaka Misa had been spoiled since she was a child. She didn't care how the Japanese cultivation world had been ravaged by Li Yundong or how deep the hatred between the two sides was. She just wanted to see with her own eyes how amazing this great hero and master, who had been rumored to be, was. After Tanaka Misa prostrated herself, she said with joy, "Then I'm looking forward to Li Jun's performance." When Li Yundong heard Tanaka Misa's words, he couldn't help but be stunned. Performance? What performance? Tanaka Misa raised her head and looked at Li Yundong curiously. She said, "Yes, Li Jun has come to visit. Aren't you going to perform a tea fight first?" Li Yundong suddenly understood. The atmosphere of Japanese tea culture was strong, and it could be said that it went deep into every corner of daily life. Before a qualified Japanese bride got married, the tea ceremony was a compulsory course. The Japanese welcomed guests, and drinking tea was also an indispensable part of the ceremony. In this part, the hostess had to dress up and solemnly follow the procedures of the tea ceremony. In Japanese tea culture, tea fighting was also an indispensable activity. This activity originated in the Song dynasty of China and flourished in the period of Emperor Renzong and Emperor Huizong of Song. At that time, Japanese envoys went west and introduced the tea fighting culture to Japan, and it immediately became popular. The tea culture in Japan was deeply intertwined with the cultivation world. The tea ceremony masters in Japan must have been eminent monks, and almost all of the eminent monks were good at the tea ceremony. In particular, the theory of Japanese tea and Zen cultivation was unique. If Li Yundong wanted to open a tea house or a tea shop in Japan, but didn't fight tea, that was absolutely impossible to open. This reason couldn't be simpler. Back then, when Hui Yuanjia, the hero of Tianjin, arrived in Shanghai on the first day, the main entrance was blocked by 2 boulders. There was no way anyone could get out. If Hui Yuanjia could not kick the 2 boulders away, he would have to return home immediately. This principle was applicable in the fields of fighting, martial arts, literature, tea, chess, and so on. If Yi Wen wanted to open a martial arts club in Foshan, he had to first win against other martial arts clubs before he could be qualified to open a club. If Li Yundong wanted to open a tea house in Japan, he had to win against the most famous local tea ceremony master in a tea fight. Only then would he be qualified to take root and gain their recognition. In other words, if he won against the most famous tea ceremony master in Japan, then he could pat his chest and say to the world that he was the best tea ceremony master in the world. At that time, De Sanxian wouldn't need to advertise at all, and people would flock to it, especially in Japan, a country where the strong were respected. Li Yundong understood this, so he smiled and said to Tanaka Misa, "Don't worry, I will participate." Tanaka Misa immediately beamed with joy. If it weren't for the fact that her strict upbringing had been deeply ingrained in her bones, she would have jumped up with excitement. After Tanaka Misa got up, she retreated respectfully. She only put on her shoes when she reached the door. Then she retreated out the door and bowed respectfully to close the door with the 2 bodyguards who were waiting at the door. After closing the door, Li Yundong couldn't help but feel strange. Although he instinctively felt that there was a reason behind it, he saw that Tanaka Misa was so happy and didn't seem to be pretending. He couldn't help thinking to himself, "Am I thinking too much and gauging the heart of a gentleman with my own mean measure?" Li Yundong turned his head to look at Ziyuan, who had been silent all this time, and asked, "Ziyuan, what do you think?" Ziyuan kept shaking her head and said, "The realm of tea art in Japan is so high that it's hard for others to imagine. Moreover, if we fight according to the rules of Japanese tea art, I'm not sure I can win." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Who said you were going to participate in the tea competition? I'll go." Ziyuan was stunned. Zhou Qin and Su Chan, who were next to her, also looked at him with their eyes wide open. They were tongue-tied. "Ah, you'll go?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Yes, of course I'll go." Su Chan and Zhou Qin looked at each other with strange expressions. Li Yundong was good at fighting, but the tea ceremony was probably not much better than his chess skills, right? If he went, wouldn't he be asking to be humiliated? Chapter 978. There was no more complicated relationship between countries in the world than the relationship between China and Japan. The 2 countries were like 2 sides of a mirror, and one side was almost the reflection of the other, especially in terms of cultural heritage. Please remember our website. Most of the Japanese culture originated from China. In the history of the Japanese nation, no matter which page was opened, the traces of Chinese history were deeply imprinted. In the past, the Japanese people tried hard to de-Chinese, just like what the Koreans were doing now. They wanted to say that the whole world was created by the Japanese. But after doing this for a while, the Japanese were depressed and desperate to find that if they wanted to ditch China, Japanese culture would disappear, and the history of the entire Japanese people would have to be rewritten. Even the most extreme right-wingers wouldn't be able to complete such a huge project by deceiving themselves. Therefore, they simply stopped trying to de-Sinicized from the root. Instead, they tried to find a conclusive evidence in any aspect of culture and history. That was, the culture of the great Japanese Empire did indeed originate from China, but today in all aspects, it had already passed through China. The Japanese had done this twice when the Mongols conquered the southern Song dynasty and the Manchus conquered the Han people. The Koreans also followed suit. They refused to recognize the empires established by the Mongols and the Manchus, and at the same time, claimed that there was no real Chinese civilization in the Central Plains, and they were the true inheritors of the Central Plains culture. In modern times, the Japanese and the Koreans saw the continuous loss of Chinese culture, and the contempt in their hearts increased day by day. The mentality of being the inheritors was infinitely magnified. Therefore, the news that Li Yundong had agreed to come to Japan for a tea competition spread throughout the Japanese cultivation world and the tea ceremony world in an instant. What? You, Li Wudi, can be arrogant in China and we can only pinch our noses and accept it. Now you can stay in China but you actually came to Japan for a tea competition. Isn't this courting death? The Japanese tea ceremony could be said to cover all aspects of Japanese society. Sometimes, Japanese people could hold a tea party when they took a bath. If a company wanted to carry out entertainment activities to win over superiors and subordinates, it would also be held in the form of a tea party. Therefore, the radiation of the Japanese tea ceremony ranged from 80-year-old people to 8-year-old children. Therefore, the news spread from the cultivation world and the tea ceremony world as quickly as possible. No matter how hard they tried to cover it up, it could not be covered up. The relationship between the Japanese tea ceremony and the Japanese cultivation world was very close, just like the relationship between the Japanese cultivation world and the Japanese political and economic world was inseparable. This matter attracted a lot of attention from the whole country of Japan, and therefore caused a huge wave, so that the eyes of the whole country of Japan could not help but cast from the tea ceremony to the cultivation world. It was too easy to dig up a person's background in modern society. Although the Japanese cultivation world had kept silent about the painful memories that Li Yundong had caused to the Japanese cultivation world several times, especially at the foot of Tianlong Mountain, the trauma that Li Yundong and the mystical silver fox had brought to them made them want to dig out this memory from the depths of their minds. But now that it had been dug out, the Japanese cultivation world quickly became aware of the current Japanese cultivation world's hatred for Li Yundong. Although their hatred for Li Yundong had increased, it was not very high among the people of Japan. Especially after Tanaka Misa had told everyone about his deeds and praised him, it had caused a great uproar. For the sake of a beloved woman, he had resolutely fought against everyone in the world, even against all the gods and Buddhas, and had gone against heaven. This was simply a plot that would only appear in a Hollywood hero film. The most important thing was that he had actually succeeded. Many young girls in love had cried bitterly for this, claiming that they must find a man like Li Yundong in this life and die for him. Not only were the young girls fascinated by Li Yundong's behavior, but many women were also stirred up by it. The social status of Japanese women was extremely low, and they were almost completely attached to men. Although there had been a slight improvement in recent years, it had not changed the overall environment of Japan. Therefore, in Japanese society, it was possible for a boy who was in love to do such a thing for a girl. But for married men and women who had been deeply integrated into the social structure and worked hard all day long, it was almost impossible for a man to do such a thing for a woman. Therefore, these Japanese women had a particularly deep feeling about this matter. Therefore, while the name Li Yundong was still being fiercely discussed and debated in Japan, the girls and women in Japan had already raised the white flag and surrendered. All of them were looking forward to the arrival of this legendary figure. This was going to be lively. The Japanese cultivation world was very annoyed to find that the big devil they hated so much, the guy who had caused the Japanese cultivation world to go back at least 10 years, was actually so popular among the people, and he was even popular with women. How could this be? This could not be tolerated. As a result, there were visitors every day at the gates of the major tea ceremony schools in the Japanese tea ceremony world. In addition to some big shots in the political and economic circles who were concerned about the situation, the most important ones were the big shots in the Japanese cultivation world. With tears streaming down their faces, These big shots held the hands of the heads of the major tea ceremony sects and told them earnestly, "Big brother, our friends in the world of cultivation have been defeated. Whether or not we can save face in this corner depends on you." Most of the family heads or heads of the major tea ceremony sects were very close to the major cultivation sections. Almost all of them were cultivators, just like all the tea ceremony masters in Japan must be eminent monks, and all the eminent monks in Japan must be tea ceremony masters. However, the tea ceremony had a great influence in Japan. The tea ceremony and politics were inseparable. Oda Nobunaga often used tea parties to win over his subordinates. The tea party was an important political activity. In order to make up for his shortcomings, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was born as a farmer, often used tea parties to win over people from all walks of life. Among them, the one who did this for him was the tea sage of Japan, Chirikyu. Because of this, Chirikyu's reputation became more and more grand. At his peak, he could even compete with Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Therefore, it also aroused Toyotomi Hideyoshi's jealousy and resentment. In the end, he killed him. Although Sun Rikyu had a tragic ending, the power of the Japanese tea ceremony and tea ceremony grandmasters could be seen from this. Therefore, the masters of cultivation sects were also quite wary of these tea ceremony grandmasters. Although they had a close relationship with them, they did not reveal the true essence of cultivation at all. Therefore, these tea ceremony masters also had a lot of resentment towards the giants of the cultivation world. F***ck, you usually don't remember us, but at this time, you want us to clean up your mess? But in the current situation they had no choice but to come out. After all, whoever could represent Japan to participate in the tea competition was a great affirmation of their own status. Therefore, these tea ceremony masters patted their chests and said, "Everyone please rest assured. If Li Yunyang doesn't come, it's fine. If he comes, we will definitely kill him." Although the tea competition was not enough to make a person hover between life and death, it was still possible to kill Li Yunyang's arrogant spirit and make him lose his invincible face. When the big shots in the Japanese cultivation world heard this, they were immediately as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. However, there were also exceptions. For example, Ise Shinto and Mount Koya remained extremely calm and did not participate in this matter. One of them sat high in the Ise Grand Shrine and watched the bustling tea competition coldly, while the other sat on Mount Koya and silently watched this competition, which was known as the unprecedented prosperity of the tea ceremony in Japan in the past 10 years. The reason why Ise Shinto was calm was that Ise Chuyun had comprehended many profound meanings of cultivation in the unprecedented battle at the foot of Tianlong Mountain. He had been comprehending cultivation concepts in front of the shrine all day long. This time, Ise Chuyun was no longer limited to Shintoism. Instead, he had expanded the scope of cultivation to Buddhism and Taoism, and began to comprehend the mysteries of the world again. A person who could touch the pinnacle of the profound meaning, or was about to touch the pinnacle of the profound meaning, must be extremely broad-minded, generous, and definitely not narrow-minded. In the process of dealing with Li Yunyang, what Ise Chuyun had learned the most was that Li Yunyang's cultivation was broad and broad. He was not limited to one school or sect, and he would never stick to the rules. On the other hand, the Japanese cultivation world was born with a narrow geography, which led to the narrow-mindedness of the nation. In the end, it was very easy for their cultivation to go into a narrow misunderstanding. Shintoism was one of them. Ise Chuyun had deeply experienced the limitations and bottlenecks of Shintoism's cultivation. At this time, she was kneeling in the Jingshin Hall in the backyard of the shrine. She was quietly kneeling on the tatami in front of the hall. In front of the courtyard, there was a Japanese-style bridge and flowing water. The bamboo water wheel was moving up and down, making an empty sound full of rhythm and zen. Ise Shingguang was also kneeling on the tatami. He tilted his head and looked at Ise Chuyun, who was looking at the sky with her eyes closed. He smiled and said, "Chuyun, what do you see?" Ise Chuyun slowly opened her eyes and said, "I see a tsunami coming towards us." The witches and goddesses of Shintoism were extremely respected, not only because of their strong spiritual power and high status, but also because they were all figures who could communicate with God and could see a certain future under certain circumstances. Ise Shingguang was silent for a long time before asking, "Chuyun, will we be spared?" Ise Chuyun turned her face and said silently, "No one can escape this disaster." Ise Shingguang was slightly shocked and said, "How could a tea battle have such power?" Ise Chuyun shook her head. "It's not just a tea battle. The tea battle is just the beginning." After that, she closed her eyes again as if she had fallen into a deep meditation. Ise Shingguang raised his head and looked at the surging wind and clouds in the sky. He sighed softly and shook his head slowly. At this time, Li Yunyang, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and his eldest disciple, Zhou Qin, had just arrived in Japan. As soon as they arrived, the whole country immediately became excited. The cultivation world, the tea ceremony world, and NHK and other media swarmed over. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.